Welcome back, Notre Dame fans, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast, but it is a special edition of the podcast because it is Friday, and that means it is the Friday free-for-all mailbag time. We are going to answer all of your questions about Notre Dame football, Notre Dame recruiting, or college football in general. And Ryan and I were just kind of going through all the questions, and man, we've already got some great ones on the docket, Ryan. Vince will not be with us today. It's just me and Ryan. Vince is coming back from vacation today, so his family and them are on their way back, and he'll be relaxing a little bit today once they get home and unpacking and doing all that kind of fun stuff. But we'll be back. A little programming note, Sean Stiers is going on vacation next week, so Vince won't be on in the afternoon show next week either. Vince is going to host IB Nation Sports Talk next week. He's already got a big guest lined up that I'm excited to listen to, and we're going to go over kind of the whole week schedule here this weekend. But Ryan, we're gonna get right to it. We got some great questions already. Going to start things off here with a Notre Dame question, and then I'm going to go to another question that is kind of real. There's a really interesting question today. I'm going to start off with this one from Sammy J. Besides football and men's basketball, what sport would you most like to see Notre Dame win a national championship? I got to go with lacrosse since the coach has been there forever. Do you have an opinion on that one, Ryan?
I mean, I guess I would go baseball, right? I think for me, growing up, I was always a football, basketball guy, actually. Those were kind of my two main sports, but I would say a third after that was baseball. I know Notre Dame is a really competitive team in hockey as well, but for me, I liked hockey a little bit growing up, but I never really gravitated towards it a ton. So I would probably go with baseball just because I think that was kind of my third growing up.
I'm there too. I think for me, it's there'd be two ways to look at this, right, Sammy? One would be, would there be a championship that would benefit Notre Dame in some way more than another? You know, so if you were to say other than football, which one would I want it to be? I'd say basketball, because that would bring sort of the most prestige and attention and those type of things. And I don't really think I don't think any of the other sports is that way. I mean, women's basketball has won a championship recently, and that's great for the women's program, but I don't think it necessarily moves the needle for the sports that I enjoy the most. I'd probably enjoy the women's I enjoyed their championship run a few years ago, and the two Final Four games of the buzzer beaters were tremendous. But I just like baseball more. I mean, I've always been a baseball fan. I've stopped watching Major League Baseball. Ryan, you and I have talked about this. I really enjoy watching the College World Series because they play more of a brand. Most teams play a brand of baseball that I grew up watching, and not like Major League Baseball. That's why I thoroughly enjoyed watching Notre Dame beat Tennessee. So I think that'd be fun, and I think that would help Notre Dame. I mean, that's the thing too, is Notre Dame's baseball team will impact Notre Dame's football recruiting more than any other sport will, because there is more crossover in the two sports. So like last year, you saw like Sam Horn, who was a big time baseball player and quarterback. You see Drake Bowen in this year's class. So you're going to have a lot of guys like that are two sport guys. And if the baseball team is legitimate, top program, I think that helps Notre Dame's baseball team and more exposure, but also helps them with recruiting. So that would be another reason for my answer, beyond just I like baseball more than all the other sports. Like lacrosse, now I'm sure it'd be cool. I don't know who their coach is. I mean, I don't follow lacrosse. I know they're very good. Mm-hmm. I don't really follow hockey, honestly. So for interest wise, it's not really something that I would do. Now my wife and I were getting ready to start. We were going to kind of go to some hockey games, and I was going to try to learn, and then stuff hit, and then couldn't be on campus because of all the craziness and all the restrictions and stuff. But maybe that'll change in a couple of years if I actually make it out to a few hockey games and be like, wow, this is actually a fun sport to follow. But right now, here's what I know of hockey. That little black thing they call the puck goes into the net, and that's a good thing. And that's about it. Here's a question from Sean Green about Notre Dame's upcoming season and their opponents. And Sean Green asks, since schedules never end up as strong or as weak as predicted in the preseason, how many opponents do you feel will overachieve, underachieve, or play close to expectations? So Ryan, you want to just let's maybe go through this start to finish and just give a quick overview. This is a great question, Sean. Give a quick overview of sort of where teams are going into the season and whether or not we think those expectations are warranted. And let's start with Ohio State. And Ohio State is a consistent top 3 team. More often than not in the polls I've seen, they're top 2.
Mm-hmm.
I would expect them to be in the top 3 to 4 in the AP and coaches poll. I would imagine closer to 2 to 3 than 3 or than 4. But who knows how that's going to go? But I think for them, Ryan, I mean, what are your thoughts on, will they overachieve, underachieve, play close to expectations? What's your thoughts on Ohio State?
Yeah, I was going to say it's a push for me personally. I think that they are a very talented football team, so I am fully okay with where they are ranked in the preseason. There are definitely some question marks. You know, how much the offensive line is going to improve. What does Jim Knowles look like defensive wise in his year one at Ohio State? So there are questions that you can kind of pick apart. But I think when you have guys like C.J. Stroud and Jackson Smith and Jigba and some of the other talented players, you know, Travion Henderson, I think that I'm comfortable with where Ohio State is. So I would say that I think they're going to be on par with they're going to be a top 3 to 4 team, I think. And because I find it hard to believe that they'll have much of a downslide. I think they're going to be about what's expected of them right now.
I don't know if I mean, no matter what happens against Notre Dame, they beat Notre Dame, they lose to Notre Dame, it doesn't change my opinion. And what I said the other day was, I think by the end of the year, I expect Ohio State to be one of, if not the best team in college football. Just because I look at it, I think that Ryan Day did make some good hires to improve his staff. I think Justin Fry was an improvement over Coach Stud on the offensive line. I don't know how well his system is going to fit Ohio State's system. That's just an unknown that you kind of have, kind of like, I don't know how Al Golden's going to adjust to, whatever the relationship with those Marcus Freeman. Until you see it, you don't really know. And he's run some different type of offense. I think that being at UCLA is going to help him better adjust to what they're doing at Ohio State, as opposed to going right from what they were doing at Boston College. But, that's a question I have. But I think he's a good football coach. And I think the big question for me is going to be, how quickly can Jim Knowles adjust, or will he adjust? And
Yeah.
that's my big question mark with Ohio State, because two things that Ohio State fans have to embrace, and they won't, most won't anyway. Number one is the talent level at Ohio State is not what I think Ohio State fans think it is. Is it bad? No. But this is not the 2015 or 2019 lineups top to bottom when it comes to talent. Zach Harrison has a lot of talent. He's not Chase Young. He's not Joey Bosa. He's not all of a sudden going to turn the light on and be Will Anderson, right? Could he be a lot better than he's been? Yeah. Could Jack Sawyer be very good? Yeah. Is JT a really talented player? Yeah. But when you look at the linebacker depth, you look inside of the defensive line, there's some good players there. I don't see elite players there. Linebacker, I mean, we're talking about Steel Chambers maybe being their best guy this year. That's a little bit of a drop off from some of the talent they've had running around at linebacker in past years. When you think about when Notre Dame last played them in 2015, you got Darren Lee outside. You've got I'm trying to remember his name. The guy was
McMillan.
No, he was a Mike. Him and Curtis Grant rotated a Mike. Josh Perry is who I'm thinking of. At Will, who's a third-round pick. The talent there now isn't in the same universe as what that group was talent-wise. I mean, you got Curtis Grant and Raekwon McMillan rotating at Mike. Same thing in the secondary. You had Eli Apple, Jerrion Conley, Von Bell, Tyreek Powell. They had Marshawn Latimer coming off the bench on that team in 2015, right? Like, the talent you have now is not that. Now, it's also better than what it was last year. So my question is where does it land? Are they going to be kind of close to last year, but a little bit better? Do they start to play to their talent level, which would make them, to me, a top 20 caliber-ish defense? That's a question mark, and that's going to be up to Jim Knowles. And here's the thing. We've talked about this before, Ryan. Jim Knowles is a very good defensive coordinator, but he, in his last 2 stops, has been a guy who believed in, we're going to install the defense, we're going to do what we do, and knowing that there's going to be some bumps along the way. And if you look at when he took over Duke and when he took over Oklahoma State, in both times he took over for coaches that were let go, they gave up more points, more yards, and more yards per play in year 1 under Knowles than they did the year before of the coach that got fired. Now, by year 2 and year 3, their defenses were really good. Does Knowles have that same approach at Ohio State, or is he going to kind of adapt and say, hey, we'll have to install this thing over time because we've got a championship we got to try to go win? That's what I don't know, because it's a different circumstance that he's stepping into, where those teams were kind of trying to rebuild. Here, they're trying to say, hey, look, this is a pretty good situation. You got to make it better so we can go out and compete for a championship. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to see which approach he takes. And I think the approach that he takes is going to determine if Ohio State can be that kind of defense because it's a complex system, Ryan. And if he's trying to throw all of it at him at once, they're going to have the same problems past defenses have had, which is you're going to give up plays and give up, you're just not going to be quite as good as you potentially could be. If he's willing to adapt and kind of find a middle ground, I think by the middle of the year, the Ohio State defense is going to be pretty good. And they're going to look a lot like the 2014 team, which in September wasn't a very good team. But by November, was as good as anybody in the country and obviously went on to win a national championship.
Yeah. No, I think we're on the same wavelength there. I was going to say, I look forward to seeing if Coach Knowles does take a more simplistic approach, because to your point, going into Duke and even going into Oklahoma State, you don't have as much dudes in the cupboard, right? Like I don't think there's a talent issue on the Ohio State defense. There's just, it hasn't been developed properly, right? So I think taking a simplistic approach and putting good athletes in good positions is a sound way of thinking for Jim Knowles. As that is successful, then maybe next year, the year after, you start to slowly integrate your system into what is already attached as far as your philosophy is concerned. So I agree. I think that's going to be the big depender, though, because I if Jim Knowles comes in and is like, nope, I don't care, we're running our defense, running the defense I've always run, then you're going to overload guys a little bit and it's going to overwhelm early on in the season. And I think it will get better as the year goes on. But I do think that I think that as a good coach, you have to have kind of some understanding that, like, hey, I got more talent here than I had the first couple years at any year that you were at Duke and any year pretty much that you're at Oklahoma State as well. So be having that understanding, I think, will go a long way to, taking a different approach, which I think will be a sound way of thinking for Coach Knowles.
Let me follow up with a question for you. Are
Yep.
you saying that Ohio State has elite talent, or are you saying that talent's good enough to where when you look at the teams they're going to play, they should be a good defense? Because you're saying talent's not a problem. I think it depends on what that means. Does that mean they're going to have an elite defense by the end of the year, or you're saying they're going to be – because, again, they don't have to necessarily be elite. They just have to be not bad. And last year they were bad, especially against the good teams they played.
Well, I'll say this. I don't think that from a large depth perspective, like from a full scope, I don't think it's elite talent from a top to bottom, but I do think that there's more than enough elite talents. Like you'd mentioned JT, Zach Harrison has not been that guy, but like he does have elite talent. He just hasn't been an elite football player. Denzel Burke, I think, has some elite talent to him. I think Cameron Brown is a good football player at corner. I think Ronnie Hickman has some elite level athleticism. So I think that he can look at that and say, I have my guys, and as I continue to adopt and to evolve, then that's where, like, hey, we need to recruit this position better. We need to recruit that position better. But I think for this year, you can be a near elite defense. I think the talent is there.
I don't think they can be elite. I don't see that talent. I think they can be really good. I think they can be very similar to what Notre Dame has been in the past, which is a really good defense, but enough holes to where you're not going to be elite, meaning you're not going to look like Clemson 2018. You're not going to look like some of the defenses Bama's had. You're not going to look like Georgia last year. Like, that's elite. And I don't see them being in that universe, in my opinion. But it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But here's the point. Will they have better talent on defense than just about every offense they're going to face in the Big Ten? Yes. That I would say. So if it's relative to the competition they play after Notre Dame, then I would say, yeah, they should be much better. It's just going to depend on what Knowles does. So very, very good question. Jared Ginn said, hey, guys, just found this channel about 2 weeks ago, and being a Notre Dame fan for 30-plus years, I believe I have watched about 100 hours of this show over the last couple weeks. Well, Jared, welcome aboard. If 100 hours, so that gives him about, a week and a half worth of videos that he's been able to catch up on. We appreciate you finding us, and hopefully you stay around and enjoy the shows that we're putting together. So, Ryan, got a super chat from Sean Higgins. Sean said, I want to ask you this, Ryan. Project roles for Jalen Sneed, Justin Walters, Eli Raridan, and Prince Colley. Also, how do Osbury and Sneed compare as prospects? Thanks, fellas. So let's start with the first part, and we're going to say project roles for 2022. Okay, so for this season. Yeah. And then we'll get to the second part. So project roles for Jalen Sneed, Justin Walters, Eli Raridan, and Prince Colley.
I expect an expansive role from Jalen Sneed during the season. I think early on we're going to see Jack Kaiser have, the majority of the reps at Rover. But I do think as Jalen Sneed starts to kind of develop a deeper understanding of the position and be comfortable at Rover. I do expect him to start to get more playing time during the season. I'm not going to say that I'll ever expect him to be unseat someone as the starting Rover, but I think by the year's end, he's going to get a solid amount of reps at Rover. So I think he's going to be a key backup, and I think he's going to have an evolving role for the defense. Justin Walters, I just think there's too much depth at safety right now. I know where we're talking about like 2023. There's going to be obviously some guys that are going to be out of the door, but right now you have Brandon Joseph, Ramon Henderson, Xavier Watts, and Houston Griffith and DJ Brown both returning. So I just think Justin Walters he's going to have to fight to get into the two deep. I think he's just going to kind of be, I don't want to call him the odd man out, but it's just there's a lot of talent there, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that he's just going to have a little bit of difficult time breaking into the two deep. Eli Raridan's an interesting one for me, Brian. I'm not really 100% sure what to expect from him. I think that could be a situation where you ease him along. Maybe he's got a simplistic package in the offense. Maybe he's, used more towards the red zone and that type of role, or he could be the number 2 tight ends by season's end. Like I could see either world happening for an Eli Raridan, and maybe by the end of the season, Michael Mayer's kind of grooming him to be the next guy. Like I think that he has that type of upside, but I think there is a little volatility towards just how much he's used this year. And I think Prince for me is going to be a backup at weak side linebacker. I think that the question is if Maris Loifau is what we think he could be, then that means that Prince is going to be rotating in, but he's not going to have a ton of time, right? But if Maris isn't the guy, then maybe that's where Prince gets a little more of an expansive role. So I guess kind of working my way here, I think Jalen Snead, again, is going to have a more of an expansive role at the end of the season, going to be eased along early. Justin Walters, I think, kind of is just going to be fighting for any type of reps because there's just a little bit of depth there. Eli Raridan, I think, could be the number 2 tight end by season's end and be developed to be the next guy. And I think Prince Kali is going to be fighting for reps behind Maris Loifau at will.
Okay, so first of all, I think Justin Walters is going to have a big role at Notre Dame this year because it's not always just about defense. And that's the thing is, special teams is a very important part of the game. So although I think it'll be tough for him to find playing time on defense, I think all 3 of the defensive players mentioned in this breakdown are going to be very key special teams players this year. I think Prince Kali is going to be a very important special teams player this year. I'll be shocked if Jalen Snead and Nolan Ziegler as freshmen aren't on special teams. I think Eli Raridan, you kind of said either or. I made it like an either or. I actually think it's going to be both. I think they're going to bring him along slowly because he's coming back from a knee injury, but I think by the end of the year, he's going to be playing a decent amount of football. And we'll go into the 2023 season battling with like Kane Barong and if Mitchell Evans comes back healthy and Holden stays for that number 1 tight end role. And I think he's the guy with the highest ceiling. So I think they'll have to bring him along slowly early on because he's coming back from the knee injury. But I think once he's fully good to go, I think they're going to force him onto the field. I do. And I think they need to. He's too talented not to play. And I think that he brings a very unique aspect to the Notre Dame offense with his height and speed and playmaking ability. I think Prince Kali, I think Prince will play at least a couple hundred snaps on defense this year. And I think that Notre Dame would really like to, from talking to Coach Freeman and just different things he said in the past, I think Notre Dame would like to be in a situation where it's playing 5 linebackers. Now, who are those 5? Is it going to be a situation, and I'm talking about like in a normal rotation, so not like nickel, so is it a situation where, Prince can battle with Bo Bauer for the starting nickel job on top of the rotation role, or does Marist have that role? And then that allows them to feel more comfortable, maybe rotating Marist out a little bit more on first and second down. Because I think, look at like last year, for example, they had 4 different linebackers play at least 354 snaps. Well, part of that is because Bo Bauer had basically a starting role in the nickel. Does that happen this year? Do we see more of a true rotation? So I think Prince will play. Plus, again, he's going to get 20-plus snaps, 4 or 5 different games where he's just going to play and mop up, when they're just blowing people out. So I'm very curious. And, of course, Ryan, as it always is, when those young guys get on the field, the better they play, the more comfortable you are using them to give guys rest. Especially, like, ideally, when you're playing Ohio State, you're playing your guys. And you play them as much as you need to win the game. But then when you play Marshall and Cal, then maybe say, look, we're going to give you every third series just to try to, number 1, get them some time. But then number 2, those are the games you try to steal some snaps for your veterans to make sure they're fresh when you go out to Las Vegas and you play BYU. And
Right.
I think that's when we can start to see Notre Dame hopefully do a better job of using some of those rotation players, maybe a 5, 10, 15 extra snaps in those games, which can then take some of that burden off. So very, very good question. And then also, how do you compare Jaden Osbury and Jalen Sneed as prospects? So there's two ways to look at this, Ryan.
Yep.
I think we would agree stylistically they're very different. So,
Mhm.
but as far as role, so I want you to answer that question, but more so look at role and
Sure.
fit as opposed to trying to compare them. This is what this guy does. This is what that guy does. Try
Right.
looking at it from a role standpoint and a fit standpoint.
Well, I think the one thing that they do have in common is that they are going to start at Rover potentially, right? If Jaden Osbury does pick Notre Dame, then he would fit right into Rover early on, just like Jalen Snead is making that transition to Rover here at Notre Dame this past spring. So you're going to see them stylistically in the same similar role. I think you could see eventually, for me, a world where Jalen Snead progresses into a will. Like if he outgrows the position, if he gets a little bit bigger, like he could be a guy that fits inside. I think, though, it's more likely that Jaden Osbury absolutely makes that transition because I think that from an instinctual perspective, Jaden Osbury can do really well inside. So I think it's more likely that Jaden Osbury long term definitely fits inside. I think Jalen Snead could, but he could also, just be a crazy athlete and stay outside and do all the things as a rover that you would want him to play a position. So I think more than likely Osbury ends up inside a little more than Jalen Snead. And Jalen Snead, I think, has the traits that he could push inside. But I'm going to say Jalen Snead long term is probably a true rover, while I think Osbury is a rover that could eventually grow or pretty quickly into a Will and maybe even a Mike down the line. Like I would not say that that's crazy that he might be a Mike, just a little bit of a smaller version.
Here's a very fun question, Ryan, that we've
Hmm.
got from Sean Kane. It says, Brian, and I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this, Ryan, or have an opinion on this because you're a bit of a young buck. I understand. It says, Brian, who wins 1989 Notre Dame versus 1995 Nebraska? That is a really interesting question, Ryan, because that
Nebraska was,
1995 Nebraska team was nuts.
yes, they
It
were a
was it
crazy
was
team.
really, really good. But I also think that I kind of look at it like this. Like if you just look at that Nebraska team in 95 and just some of the talent that they had, right? Like obviously their offensive line was nuts that year. You had Tommy Frazier at quarterback when he was healthy. You had Lawrence Phillips and Amon Green at running back. Defensive line, Christian Peter, Jason Peter, Grant Windstrom, Terrell Farley, Jamel Williams, Mike Minter in the secondary. I mean, that was a really good defense. Notre Dame also had a really talented team that year, especially skill players. I mean, you're talking about Tony Rice being a dynamic player quarterback. You've got Rocket Ismail. You've got Ricky Waters playing running back for that team. You got Rodney Culver in the rotational running back, Anthony Johnson at running back, and those are two guys that spent a lot of time in the National Football League. You got Derek Brown at tight end. So I think both of those teams were incredibly talented. And when you look at Nebraska that season, I mean, it's not that they just went undefeated, Ryan. I mean, they destroyed people. I'm looking at it now. The closest game they played all year was a 14-point game, a home win over Washington State. I mean, they absolutely annihilated. And that was, it was a 3-8 Washington State team. But I mean, you're talking about they beat a number 10 Kansas 41-3. They beat number 7 Colorado 44-21. They beat Kansas State, was really good that year, 49-24. I think that wasn't that a Michael Bishop team? I could be wrong on that, but I thought that
I
was a
think
Michael
you
Bishop led.
you might be right.
Yeah,
That's
but
close.
actually, I think he might have been a little bit like 97, 98. But that was a pretty good Kansas State team. And then, of course, they annihilated Florida in the national championship game 62-24. Although that was an interesting game because I felt like Florida came into that game with just a really horrible game plan. Then you look at Notre Dame; they played more competitive games that year. Beat Michigan on the road by 5 in a game. Rocket Ismail took 2 back to the house. Had a 4-point win over a pretty good USC team. Beat Penn State convincingly on the road. Lost them. The best team. The best team in the country in '89 was Miami. Lost to them on the road. So if you're talking about what it would have looked like in the title game, I kind of look at what the bowl game looked like that year. I mean, you played the best team in the Big 12 that year. That Colorado team that Notre Dame played that year was also really good. They beat number 10 Illinois 38-7, blasted number 21 Washington 45-28. They had conference wins of 49-3, 52-17, 49-17, 20-3 at Oklahoma, beat number 3 Nebraska that year, beat Oklahoma State 41-17, beat Kansas State 59-11. They were undefeated. They were blowing people out, and then they went and played Notre Dame and just got completely outclassed. And I think Miami was a horrible match. I mean, Nebraska was a horrible matchup for Florida. I mean, Florida was about speed and, getting the ball out to, their receivers and I mean, they kept going empty and they couldn't protect. It was just such a horrible game plan. And Nebraska was fast and physical. Notre Dame in '89 was fast and physical. So I think it would have been a great game, to be honest with you. And two of the better option quarterbacks I've ever seen in Tony Rice and Tommy Frazier. Tommy was a better passer. I think Tony Rice was an even more explosive runner. But, man, those would have been some really, really talented offensive teams. I would probably give the edge to that '89 Notre Dame team. I think it was a tremendous team. And, it would have been a great game. It would have been a great game. But I think when you look at what Notre Dame was able to do against Big 12 teams during that stretch, I mean, every year at the end of almost every year for about 5 years, Notre Dame played the best team in the Big 12 in the postseason, and they won every game. They beat they won all but one game. They beat Colorado in '89. They lost to Colorado in '90 on the phantom, clip penalty on Rocket. They played Florida in '91. Then after that, they played Texas A&M again, beat Texas A&M 28-3. Texas A&M was obviously a Big 12 team back then. And then in 1993, they played Texas A&M and beat Texas A&M again. Actually, I'm wrong on that. They didn't play a Big 12 team. That was before the Southwest Conference split up. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think the Big 12 became a thing until a couple years after that. So, but they still had, like I said, they played those type of teams from that division and had a lot of success and beat them. So I think it would have been a good game. Would they have beat Nebraska? I don't know. Do I think they could have beat Nebraska? Yeah. I think that Notre Dame would have been a much tougher matchup for that '95 Nebraska team than Florida was. That's for darn sure. But, man, that was a great Nebraska team. The '94 team, definitely Notre Dame could have beat that team. And that was a good team, but the '95 team was just nuts. I mean, that '95 team was just insanely good.
Yeah,
I mean, just NFL players everywhere on that team. I mean, it was
that was when they were actually the black shirts. They haven't been like that in a long time.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was a really, really good team. Sean has another kind of what if question from back in the past, and it's if everything else stayed the same, meaning admissions, etc., but Barry Alvarez took over for Holtz in 1997, what level of success would he have had?
It's an interesting one. I mean, I would say Barry Alvarez is a great coach, so I would think that it would have started to, I don't think we would have went into the little bit of a tailspin that obviously happened in the early 2000s, right? In late 90s. Like, I think that I think Notre Dame could have been able to recover if that was the situation, because Barry Alvarez is a fantastic coach. I mean, look what he's built, just kind of by himself. And yeah, I don't think the drop off between Lou Holtz and Alvarez is much at all. Like, I think that Alvarez is a phenomenal coach in his own right. So I think that you probably could have recovered from some lost momentum there in the late 90s.
Yeah, because again, you're not comparing him to the 1990, 91, 92, 93, 88, 89 version of Lou Holtz. By 1997, when Lou had left, he wasn't as engaged on a daily basis. We've heard all the stories about that, right? He had his own health issues. His wife, Beth, had her health issues. And he had been fighting battles with the administration for years that I think just kind of wore him down. So I think that with Barry Alvarez, you would have got a younger coach, a more energetic coach, a guy that believed in very similar things that Lou Holtz believed in, fundamentals, physical, play hard-nosed football, buy into the things you're trying to do on and off the field. So I think what we would have seen, Ryan, is a lot like what Lou's last couple teams looked like. The 94 team took a step back, but in 1995, they went 9-3 and you took Florida State down to the wire in the Orange Bowl. That was lost to Ohio State by 19, but that was a game Notre Dame had a lead in the second half. Went 8-3 and finished in the top 20 the next year. If Coach wasn't leaving, they would have gone to a bowl game, probably would have won, would have gone 9-3. I think we would have seen a lot of that. I think, Barry Alvarez would have gotten a lot more out of Jarius Jackson than what Bob Davie did. I think Barry Alvarez would have had an offensive philosophy he believed in. He would have stuck to it instead of constantly going back and forth like Bob Davie did during his tenure. So I think they would have recruited better. I think they would have played better. I think they would have been better in big games, recruited better. I mean, I just think all of it. I just think Bob Davie was in over his head. I don't think Bob Davie was a good defensive coordinator. He was not a great defensive coordinator. He was not a head coach. He definitely wasn't a head coach for a place like Notre Dame. So I agree. I think the floor would have been a lot like the 95, 96, 97 teams of 8-3, 9-3 type teams. And then every couple years, you'd have had that team that made a run. That's what I think would have happened. Because he would have been fighting against the administration. I mean, that's
right.
The reality. And then now, would he have been in place when a new administration came on that supported football? If he was still there, then they could have taken off and kind of been what Wisconsin was when they were at their best. And that's what I think they would have been under Barry Alvarez. Because as you said, Ryan, guy was a great coach and won for a long time at a place that not a lot of people have win, and Brett Bielema kind of rode those coattails for a few years and then, starting to fade off a little bit when he took off for Arkansas.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, he was a great developer, obviously, and he built something at Wisconsin that I thought was built so strongly from a foundational perspective. Because, like you said, I've had a couple coaches that have come in Wisconsin now and they've done pretty good. I mean, it's been a lot more sporadic than obviously it was, but I just think the foundation was so well built by Coach Alvarez that they were able to maintain it for a little bit even after he left. So.
Let's go to the next one. Quinn Kibler. Even though CJ Carr is a little bit older for his grade, he seems to be filling out a little bit later than most his actual age, not grade. Do you think it will be a different story even by 2023? I want to push back on this notion a little bit, Ryan.
Yeah.
You say he's older for his grade. He's not that much older for his grade. It's partly a little bit older, right? Because of when his birthday is, but it's also Dante Moore is young for his age because that's the whole thing. Well, he's same age as Dante Moore. He's 17 years old. He's going to be 18 as a senior in high school. He doesn't turn 19 until after he graduates high school. He's not that old. Also, your age doesn't necessarily determine your growth patterns. So every 15-year-old doesn't grow. I mean, look at the kid that Notre Dame just offered yesterday. He looks more grown than most class of 22 kids in the in the face and his body. So when I had a chance to see CJ up close, I don't know what his age is, but I said, that's a young kid. You could just see his face. You could see in his build. You could see a kid that's got a lot of time to develop. But even if he was in the same developmental stage as an advanced 17-year-old, he's still a 17-year-old.
Right.
Who's going to continue, probably maybe grow a half an inch. He's going to fill out his frame. He's going to get stronger. Most people aren't done growing even close when they're 17 years old. So I think he's going to continue to grow and mature, but he's not that much older for his age that as people think. Like I said, he'll be 17 his whole junior year. He'll turn 18 after his junior year is completed, like right after. It's like June.
Right.
And then he'll be 18 for his whole senior year. And so he won't turn 19 until he's on camp. Actually, he'll be done with his first semester of college at Notre Dame before he turns 19 because he'll be an early enrollee. So I think that's overstated. I think very much overstated when people talk about how he's old for his age. He's a month older than I was when I graduated high school. Right, because I had one of those weird kind of late spring, early summer birthdays, and just do you start early? Do you start late? You're either going to be older for your grade or going to be young for your grade, and that's the reality of it. So
I feel like I'm in an NFL draft sphere for a second. I'm talking about like a 25-year-old rookie, right? It's like, oh, how much stronger is he going to get? What's the core strength going to be on that one? And like you said, he's 17 years old. I mean, I remember Tim Duncan grew like 2 inches while he was at Wake Forest. I mean, people develop at much different kind of rates, right? So to your point, it is overstated. I agree, especially when you're just talking about like potentially gaining strength and weight. I mean, because if CJ Carr is done growing from a height perspective, what is he, Brian? 6'2.5"? Like it's fine.
Yeah.
Like It's not like he's
He doesn't
short.
grow another inch, he's fine. Correct.
Exactly. Yeah, like he needs to
Correct.
fill out, of course, like every other 17-year-old needs to fill out.
All right, let's go to another question from Sean Kane. If you could take two current players from another team, one offense and one defense, and put them on Notre Dame's 2022 team, who would they be? I'm never a fan of answering these questions because I feel like it's disrespectful to the kids that chose Notre Dame, but I'll play along.
It's so much fun, though. It's so
It,
much
it is,
fun.
but it's just kind of like, oh, I mean, hey, look, those guys didn't pick Notre Dame, but I'll play
Sure.
along.
Yeah.
Ryan, do you kind of have we'll go offense first. We'll both give our offensive picks and then both give our defensive picks. Do you have anyone on offense that you kind of look at and say, hey, I mean, there's obvious ones, right? Like, CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, those kind of guys. I would
I
actually
was
go in a
thinking wide
different direction.
receiver.
Yeah, that's
I
what
was
I was going
thinking
to
a wide
say.
receiver. My question is though, and just for my early work, I don't know which wide receiver I would prefer. I guess the conversation for me would be between Jackson Smith and Jigba and Keyshawn Butte out of LSU. I
Mhm.
like Butte. If he's healthy, I think he's a stud. So I guess I'll go Keyshawn Butte out of LSU.
Because he's a guy that in the right system could play boundary, correct? In a
He can
more
play
pro style
anywhere.
offense, right? I
Yeah, he
mean,
could play
yeah.
anywhere. Mhm.
Whereas I don't know if Jackson Smith and Jigba's a guy that I would want to put into the boundary. He's kind of a skinnier guy, not real strong, like smooth,
He's
athletic, very
he's
talented.
he's
He's
played
a
like
field guy.
90%
Yeah.
of his snaps in the slot in his career. So yeah,
Yeah.
he's not a guy
Yeah.
that's going to do that.
Butte would be the kind of the first thought that I had. Plus, thing I like about him, he can make plays down the field and he
Mhm.
can make plays after the catch, and he's strong. He's built kind of
He's
like a big running
explosive.
back. Yeah, he's
Yep.
got a really
Yep.
nice frame. I
Mhm.
would probably look somewhere there. Defensively, give
That's an
me any
interesting
elite
one.
corner. I mean, that's really where I stand. I don't think Notre Dame has necessarily huge needs anywhere else. You could say, oh, maybe a big nose tackle. Give me Jalen Carter, somebody like
That's
that.
that's where I was
But
going to go. Is
yeah,
it for me? It was Will Anderson, but then you have to figure out Will Anderson, Isaiah
right.
Foskey. Like, cool. I probably would have go Jalen
Although you
Carter. I
could
think
you
he would
could
have
put
been.
Isaiah Foskey to big end,
You
and he'd
can.
be fine. For me, it's kind of like, do you want to go the route of strengthening something that's already your strength, or do you want to go in a way where you're like, does Jalen Carter or Will Anderson boost your D line more than taking a great corner would boost your your secondary? I guess is kind of the way that I look at it. You know what I mean, Ryan?
Yeah, no, it's
So
fair. I guess my mindset went. I think Will Anderson and Jalen Carter are just tier above whoever I
sure.
would consider the best corner. I mean,
Oh,
because
sure.
which corner would I take? Would it be Kelly Ringo? Would it be Hick? What's the kid's name from Eli Ricks? Like, who am I
Mhm.
taking at corner?
Riley
Like
Moss from
that's
Iowa is a guy that gets a lot of preseason love. you
yeah,
know but here's
yeah.
here's my thing is like, you are right, they are better players, there's no question, but I just
Mhm.
go back to, you're still going to have the same question marks in the secondary. And when I look at that, you matchups against an Alabama, against an Ohio State, against one of the teams you're going to have to play in the postseason, what if they can look, teams are going to be able to slow down your pass rush if they're good enough, right? Can you then cover? And
Sure,
that's the thing for me. Is like with the defensive line as it is now, they're not going to have a huge problem getting pressure on the quarterback this year, I don't think.
that's fair.
Now, the one exception for me might be Will Anderson,
Yes.
because more so than Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter is a phenomenal player,
Mhm.
but I look at the idea of, because of the matchups that Notre Dame plays, the big matchups they play. When I think of Ohio State, Clemson,
Mhm.
and USC, and then getting into the postseason, a potential rematch against Ohio State,
Right.
playing potentially Alabama and their pro style attack, but a pass oriented pro style attack. Let's say Texas gets hot and makes a run. All the teams that you could potentially play, except for Georgia,
Mhm.
are going to be pass oriented teams where you're going to have a much easier an opportunity to get Foskey and Will Anderson on the field together and just
Sure.
dominate the edge. And then all of a sudden, how do you block Jason Adamiola at that point in time if you've got to worry about those two guys? And then you move Riley
That's
Mills
fair.
inside, and because so the unique matchups of it are intriguing. If I thought Notre Dame was going to play an old school Notre Dame schedule where you're playing Michigan and their power football, and Michigan State and their power football, and Stanford and their power football, it'd be Jalen Carter. But
Yeah.
because of the nature of the schedule, it's either got to be Will Anderson or preferably a top corner. And I mean, you
And
said which guy would it be? Wouldn't be
Yeah,
Rick's because I think he's overrated, and I don't know if he's going to like show up the next day.
sure.
But yeah, you give me Keely Ringo opposite Cam Hart with Brandon Joseph at safety. Yeah,
It's a good
well,
unit.
pretty
It's a
darn
good
good
unit.
defense.
Pretty good.
You know,
Yeah.
pretty good,
I mean,
darn good
to your
defense.
point about the Will Anderson versus Jalen Carter debate, it also strengthens your interior if you take Will Anderson because then you can use a guy like a Riley Mills more inside.
That's
So
right.
that's a good point.
You have
To your
one
point.
heck. Yeah, and that's the thing for me. It's just building the complete roster. I mean,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, when we're talking about Will Anderson versus Jalen Carter, the
Mhm.
reality is there's not a wrong answer.
No,
You know,
just what's your
it's
flavor?
just about preference. Yeah.
100%.
Scott Yerbick said, "How do you think the Rocket would be used in today's game? Would he have the same success?" No,
He
he would not have the same success. He'd be way better
I
in
know I was about to
today's game.
say, did you see? I know you're not an NFL guy, Brian, but did you see how San Francisco just used Debo
Debo,
Samuel?
yeah,
It would be different, but that's what you would get. I mean, Debo just had like 1,400 yards receiving, but he also had like 8 rushing touchdowns, right?
mhm,
Like that's him. And then also, but the difference is that Rocket also is a great return man. Debo's
right,
not. Like Debo's just an offensive exclusive player, dynamic player for his role. But I mean, yeah, I agree. He would be much better in a game that is, and I feel like I say this every single show, but in a game that you're trying to manufacture space so much in today's world, I mean, Rocket in that offense. Like, could you imagine him in like Kyle Shanahan's system, just like getting him some
yeah.
like wide open crossers and like quick screens and all that stuff, man? Like, it would just be silly. It would be really silly.
This is kind of the way that I look at it, Ryan. I think if I were to talk about how he would be used, I really go back and think of how, players that are comparable. And you use the NFL example, but here's the thing: do you remember DeAnthony Thomas from Oregon? So he was like,
Sorry, I was shaking. I was
no,
shaking
it's
my
okay,
head. I was on
it's
mute, but I
okay.
was shaking my.
I
I was like,
I was looking at his stats. I'm like, Ryan, are you
That's.
listening?
I swear I was listening. I was shaking my head.
You look
Everyone
at the
can
way that
confirm.
Oregon used him. So, like, for example, 2011, he had 595 rushing yards, averaged 10.8 yards per carry, had 46 catches for 605 yards. He also returned two kickoffs for touchdowns. He had 4 kick returns for scores in his career. He had a punt return for a score in his career, rushed for 26 touchdowns, caught 15 touchdowns, had over 1,800 yards rushing, had over 1,200 yards receiving. Like, to me, he did all that, and he ran a 4.5 flat.
I know.
Right. And
Mhm.
and it wasn't just that Rocket was fast. Rocket was also elusive and strong.
Sure.
And imagine that. And he ran a 4.23 shuttle, 6.94 cone time. Not, great number, but like he was that real versatile all around player.
Mhm.
Whether you want to talk about,
Percy Harvin was a guy
I
that popped
mean,
in my
yeah,
head.
Percy
Yeah.
Harvin. But honestly, in the Notre Dame offense now,
Mhm.
he's everything we said yesterday about Braden Lindsey is exactly how Rocket would be used, except Rocket would be a higher volume guy.
Sure.
Because like I don't know if you remember this, Ryan, but like in '89, especially in '90, late in games, Notre Dame would put him at running back, and and Lou Somogyi used to talk about this all the time. They would wear you down, get you worn out, and then in the fourth quarter they'd put Rocket in and throw like tosses and run ISO encounters with him, and he just rip off like a 60-yard run and put the game away. And so he could line up at running back. He was so strong for his size, and I think that's the thing. A lot of fans who didn't watch him live at the time don't quite understand about Rocket is he was a really physically strong player for his size. I mean, just go look at some of his kick returns where he's brushing people off. So, I mean, specifically, Scott, he'd be taking the top off the defense, go routes, post routes. You'd be getting him on climb, crossers, a lot of things. Talking about Braden Lindsey, jets, reverses. But honestly, I think you'd also be smart to just at times put him in the backfield and run power read concepts with Tyler Buckner, where you've got the jet sweep with Rocket or you've got to cover Tyler Buckner. I think those would be some really interesting alignments. But I think Rocket would be a guy that would have about 1,000 yards receiving. I think he'd have like 1,500 yards rushing. He'd be a dynamic return guy. He would be. I mean, he's still. I'll say this: the 2 most explosive players I've ever seen in college, and this is all due respect to Reggie Brooks and guys like that, but the 2 most explosive dynamic players I've ever seen were actually somewhat contemporaries of each other, and that was Barry Sanders and Rocket Ismail. They had 1 year of carryover in college. So Barry was his last year at Oklahoma State was Rocket's freshman year at Notre Dame. So they had that 1 year carryover. And then the Rocket played the next 2 years, but I've still never seen a more explosive player than either one of those two. It just, I mean, some of the numbers Barry Sanders put up were just dumb. And then when you look at Rocket was doing modern stuff. Like, this is the thing about Lou Holtz is like, I would have liked to see him do more with Rocket. I mean, he was kind of doing some modern stuff with Rocket back then, using him as a receiver and a running back and doing all that kind of stuff. He'd be a lot of fun to watch in today's era. Again, D'Anthony Thomas with over 0.2 of a second off of his 40 time. Think about that.
Crazy. He probably runs the same 40 as he ran a 20-yard shuttle, right?
He's probably as fast as D'Anthony Thomas right now. You know what I mean? Like, he's lost a couple steps. He's probably around a 4 or 5 now.
I like how most people always say, like, I would like to see this quarterback in the current era. Like that, they talk about guys like Cordell Stewart and sure.
John Elway.
Yeah, I agree. But also, I feel like we don't talk enough about like the space players of the past. We're just like, could you imagine him in this game now? Like,
I mean, Rocket was still playing receiver in an era where they put their hand in the ground.
Right.
I mean, as receivers. I mean, Notre Dame did. Not everybody did, but Notre Dame did. A lot of teams did. Where they're getting in a 3-point stance to take off as a receiver, which is just nuts. But that's what they would do. So
I think of that even like with guys on defense, like Lawrence Taylor a little bit too, right? It's like, because Lawrence was obviously a great pass rusher, but then also the Giants would use him just kind of as a stacked linebacker a ton too. Could you imagine if they were just like, you're Von Miller, you're on the edge every single play? He'd probably have the sack record right now. Like, that's just that type of stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Think about just the volume of sacks he had relative to the number of pass attempts you were facing on a week-to-week basis. Yeah,
exactly. He had like 130 something sacks in a non-passing era, really. So yeah.
Sean Kane asks, if these 4 race right now in the 100, what would the finish order be? Chris Tyree, Micah Bell, Braden Lindsey, Braylon James. I say flip the first 2 and then you've got it.
I was about to say Micah Bell. Yeah, it's pretty much there. I was going to say Micah Bell takes that one in my opinion, just in general. But
they're running the 50, maybe Chris Tyree. If they're running a 50-yard dash, maybe Chris Tyree. Chris Tyree's short numbers were dynamic. His 55 indoor times. I mean, as a sophomore and a junior in both years, I didn't look at his senior year numbers. He had the fastest 55. I think it was 50. He either ran the 55 or the 60. I forget which one. But as a sophomore and a junior, he had the fastest times in the nation for his age, for his grade.
I think he was a 55 kid, if I remember correctly.
So, and I'm not talking football prospects. I'm talking about he had the fastest 55-meter time in the country in both of those years, which is just insane for guys in his grade. So that would be one heck of a race. 100, I think Micah Bell's got longer legs, and that's where I think he would end up pulling ahead. Because you see this all the time, Ryan. Like, you'll see a guy that's trailing for like the first 70, meters, and then all of a sudden just, he has
a kick. He has a kick.
Yeah, like Usain Bolt had a great burst, but when you watch a lot of his track meets, like, he's usually not the first guy out of the blocks.
His starts were never great, man. That was the thing about Usain, is he ran 9.58 and like his starts weren't great
because he's so long. It's hard to get a good start when you're long, And there was a lot of times. Who was that guy that the American he would always go against? Was it Tyson Gay? Was that kind of one of his rivals?
Tyson Gay was one of them. Jesse Gatlin was another.
But they were both. Yeah. There was a couple guys that were just really short guys.
Yes,
and you'd always think
Gatlin was like 5'10".
Yeah, and you're like, oh, this is the time they're going to beat him. Look at the start. Look at the jump they got on Usain, and by halfway they're like, see ya.
Usain is crazy, man. He's a legit 6'5". Like, he is long.
Those shorter guys get really good starts, and the longer guys tend to be better finishers. That's why you see a lot of those not all of them, because the guy that just smoked the 200 record, beat Michael Johnson's 200-meter record yesterday, is not a real tall guy. But a lot of those guys tend to be really good in the longer events, right? Not all of them. Donovan Bailey was really tall, if you remember him. He also was on performance enhancers and all that. But like Michael Johnson was a better long distance. He was a better 200 and 400 guy than he was a 100-meter sprinter. That's why when they did that famous race, he wouldn't run him in 100, and Donovan didn't want to run him in a 200, so they went with the 150. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, but that's why I would say I'd go with Micah Bell longer. And Braylon James in that race wouldn't even be close in a 100-meter dash. And he's fast. Yes. That's how insane those guys are track-wise.
But let's pull out some 110 high hurdles, then. This will be a little bit of a different conversation for Braylon James.
He might be first. He might be first because that's all he is.
With those strides, 100%.
Yeah.
Can somebody ask us about this type of question with some linemen next? I want to talk about who I think will win between Blake Fisher, Rocco Spindler.
No.
And no? Okay.
No. No,
All right.
sorry.
I'll
We're not.
start if it pops up. I'll start
No.
if it pops
Yep.
up.
Yeah. You go ahead and do that. I want to put into context some of these numbers though, for
Yep.
because I don't think Braden Lindsey would necessarily be that close in a race either. Like
Sure.
he would be in the conversation, but he wouldn't be like, you wouldn't be thinking he was going to win it. And I want to put some context to this because I think people need to understand Micah Bell and Chris Tyree aren't just fast football players. They're fast track guys, period. You know,
Mhm.
like they're like legit. Like I think, what did I see this year that that Micah Bell had the 5th best 200-meter time in the country,
Yep.
regardless of whether they were football players or not, I believe. But Braden
28.9.
Lindsey won a state championship in track in the 200. He was
Mhm.
a really good 200-meter runner, to the point where Oregon was trying to recruit him to run track at Oregon. And if you know anything about Oregon's track program, it's pretty good. His
Yes.
best times, his best 200-meter time ever was a 21.49. And he won a
Just
state championship with that number. So, I mean, he was really fast. Micah Bell, as a junior this past year, ran a 21. He beat that multiple times.
Mhm.
He had a 21.4 in early March. Now that matters because you're going to get faster as the year goes on, just like a lot of sports.
Yes.
In the whatever championship they were in, his 200-meter time was a 20.89.
Which is
Like,
over half a second faster.
right.
And just for math.
Correct.
Yeah.
Chris Tyree, you know, again, he didn't run. It's hard to compare Chris Tyree because Chris stopped running, I believe, the 200 as a sophomore, but Chris Tyree's best time was a 21.57 as a sophomore, which is pretty fast.
It's very
So
fast.
his sophomore time was better than Braden Lindsey's senior time. But again, when you look at Chris Tyree, he was more of a 55-meter guy. So he ran a 6.39 as a sophomore, 6.3 flat as a junior, and 6.31 as a senior, which are incredibly fast times. So, but I mean, so just to put into context just how fast those guys are, like they are, I don't say world class, because when you think world class, you start thinking like Olympics. I don't think they're there. Maybe Micah Bell could be, but they are elite high school track guys. Like Chris Tyree's best 100-meter dash time was a 10.66, but he ran that as a sophomore.
Right.
That's really fast. You know, Braden Lindsey's best 100-meter time, I think, was like a 10.8. But again, he stopped. He ran that as a sophomore as well, I believe, sophomore or junior, I believe. But that's not in the same ballpark. And we're talking about a guy that's a mid to low 4.4 guy, right?
Yep.
And that's just how fast that those two guys are. But Micah Bell is as impressive as Chris Tyree's numbers are. Micah Bell's are even more impressive. It's
Mhm.
he's he's a jumper. That's the other thing.
Yes.
Like,
He's a
you don't see
24 plus foot long jumper.
you
Like,
don't see
yeah.
that very often. You really don't. I mean,
No.
Chris Tyree's best long jump time was 22.9, which is, again, pretty good for a guy that's 5'9.5", right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Micah Bell's best long jump is over 2 feet longer than that. I mean, so it his stuff is really, really impressive. Really,
Mhm.
really impressive. And I don't think Braden Lindsey was a jumper. I don't think he was a jumper.
I don't think so either.
So that's gives you a little bit of a look
Does
at
Braylon
those
does
guys.
Braylon James jump? I know he's a
That's a
long,
good
I know he's
question.
a high hurdler,
I
but
can look it up real quick. I know that Tobias Merriweather was a jumper.
yeah.
I'd be curious what his numbers were as well as we look through this. But let me look and see Braylon James track statistics here.
I wouldn't be surprised if he was a high jumper, most likely. But
His numbers don't show up here. Let's see here. High jump, yes, 6 foot personal record. He did that as a 10th grader.
okay,
So I
it's
don't
pretty
know.
solid.
I don't have great context for that, but that was looks like he's
So,
only done it a couple times. It doesn't look like he's done a lot of jumping.
yeah,
So
they were like, you can jump high, just do that real
sure.
quick.
Yeah.
Like, you don't
Yeah.
have to practice, just go jump a
Yeah,
couple
I know,
times.
right? Yeah, the best, let's see here. They don't have Tobias Merriweather's updated jumps on here. But because I'm pretty sure he was jumping as a junior, but they have his longest jump. They don't have it 2019, so that would have been what, freshman year.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't look, and that was 18:10, but that's, I mean, that's so out of context because he was just a freshman. So I
Right.
don't yeah, his best time of 200 is 21.8, which is pretty good for, pretty
For
good
his
time.
size.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a pretty good
Yeah.
time. Scott Yerbick says, if Coach Freeman gave you the playbook and said you call plays for one series, what would you call?
Who we
I mean,
playing?
yeah, I love questions like this because they're creative and they're fun. But I'll be honest with you, these are better questions to ask in the season when we're getting ready to play an opponent where I can have context. I mean, that's the thing is what's the down and distance? Is that series? Are we starting at our own 5? Are we starting in the red zone? Or is it the first series of a game? Is it the first series of the second half? I mean, is it the third series of the game? I mean, there's what defense are we playing? What's the strengths of their personnel? Do they have a good front? Do we need to protect? Because I may say a team that's slow and athletic, I might say, hey, we're going to come out, we're going to go empty, we're going to go 11 personnel, we're going to mix it up, we're going to get on the perimeter because they're big and slow. If it's a team that's kind of fast but undersized, I may say, hey, let's go 12 personnel and do some different things and move the pocket. Do they have a cornerback that I want to go after? Do they have a safety I want to go after? Can I manipulate them with motions and shifts and different things like that? There's so much to consider that it would be impossible for me to say what I would do. So I mean, but generally speaking, I try to go into every series with a design of being able to run our best run. And I want to do a play where we're going to be able to take a shot. Right. And then, of course, there's quick game stuff built in based on down and distance. But I always want to try to find a way. How can we get our best run plays established and our best run play established? And I want to look for an opportunity to take a shot every series. And that's kind of how I do it. But specifically, there's just so much context. But Scott, hang on to this question because this is stuff that I have no problem answering if I have a better answer. And some people have asked, like, what would you call against Ohio State? I haven't dove enough into Ohio State to say this is exactly what I would do, other than specifically saying I'd probably be more run call oriented and then have the RPOs built off of it. I would mix up my alignments, my personnel, and all that stuff just to start seeing how they're going to respond to different things. Because that's the other part. If you're going to say I get to call the first series of the game, that's going to look a whole lot different than I get to call the fourth series of the game. Because the first series I'm kind of prodding, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, what are they going to do to this? What are they going to do to that? Based off film. We know what we think they're going to do because of what we saw in film, but let's see if they do the same thing against us. And then you got to be careful sometimes because if you think they're going to do something, you got to make sure that you don't then use it as just a look to see. So, for example, we were playing against my alma mater, actually. We were coaching against my alma mater when I was at Christopher Newport, and we were playing them in the first round of the playoff at their place. They were undefeated, top 5 team. Well, I played against, I mean, the head coach and the D coordinator were the head coach and D coordinator when I was playing. And so I kind of had an insight into how they thought, but they loved going corners over. So if they were playing like a base, this is back when, 21 personnel was used a whole lot more than it is today. When you'd go 21 personnel, that's 2 running backs, a tight end, and 2 receivers, and you go slot, 2 corners in a twins alignment, they would go corners over. So what we did is we went 21 personnel, but we gave them a twins look. But what we did was we put our running back, Roland Hilliard, in the slot. And then we'd put one of our receivers, George Jones, in the backfield and then motion him out because they only had either a linebacker or safety. Well, the reality is we didn't want to show them that look to see how they would respond. We wanted to say, let's use this on a play. And so we had 2 play calls off of it. The first one, we threw just a one-on-one George against a receiver, a safety. We scored it for a touchdown. So then we came back to it again later at about our 35-yard line. We did the same thing, and we knew they would overreact to it, and we banged a backside post route off of it, right? Well, we had 2 shots at it. I mean, we weren't going to be able to do that more than a couple times because then they would have answers to it after that. So you got to make sure you use that appropriately as well, but you also need to do different things to try to poke and prod and see what they're going to do. So that's all the fun stuff that I'll be honest with you, that's really the only thing about coaching that I miss is that stuff. The game planning, the mental chess that you go through during a game, that's the stuff I miss, right? And I mean, the relationships with the kids and that stuff is obviously always something you have, but as far as the actual coaching aspect, that's really the only thing that I miss about it, to be honest with you.
Scott, you should ask this question every single week for a
there you go.
For a opponent preview, and then we should match up Brian's script versus Coach Reese's script after the week. That would be fun.
Well, there's not a right or wrong; it's what your preference is.
There's a right or wrong. Yeah. There's a right or wrong.
No, there isn't. Stonador, you're always trying to start stuff lately. I'm going to have a little chat about this after the show. Stonador, based off of players projected to leave for the draft and incoming recruiting classes, which ND team do you think will be more talented, 2022 or 2023? So let's get this premise out of the way, Ryan. What guys do we anticipate leaving? We both agree that Michael Mayer will be
Yes.
gone. We both
Yes.
agree that Isaiah Foskey will be gone.
Yes.
We both agree that Cam Hart will be gone.
Yes.
What about Brandon Joseph?
I would say 70-30 he's gone.
Okay. So let's say of that scenario, one of them comes back. Who would be the most? Because, I mean, every year you have some guy that you think is going to leave that comes back, right? This year was Jarrett Patterson. Everybody thought he was gone after the season. He decided to come back. Foskey was a guy that people thought was going to be gone. He decided to come back. This was a unique situation because of the Coach Freeman era. Normally you get a guy to come back. Who would you say would be most likely to come back? I would say either Cam Hart or Brandon Joseph, correct?
Yeah, I would say Brant. Actually, no. It's a tough one between Brandon and Cam for me.
So let's say Brandon comes back.
Right.
Everybody else leaves that we think is going to leave. So now Notre Dame signs the guys that we think they're going to get in 23. So, Ronan Hannafin, Jeremiah Love, one of the quarterbacks we like, Jaden Ausberry. Okay, that's who they sign. Okay.
Yep.
Am I forgetting anybody?
Nope. Don't think so.
Just make sure this. So Driscoll didn't say this, so they're not going to get that guy. Which we'll have an example of that here in a little bit when it comes to the Austin Ausberry question. It's like as soon as I shouldn't have said that because now people are going to take it and it's going to become the latest rumor, and it is. So anyway, which team is, in your opinion, Ryan, is more talented?
I think I would go 2023. I think it's a really close question because I mean losing guys like Michael Mayer and Isaiah Foskey are obviously. I mean, those are big losses. I'm just anticipating more the growth of the sophomore class, especially when I'm thinking about what a Tyler Buckner can be in 2023, what the offensive tackles can be, and then you bring in potentially the number one class in recruiting side of everything. So I think I would lean 2023, but you can convince me either way, honestly, on this one.
I think it depends on the side of the ball. And that's like, I actually think even with the loss of Michael Mayer, I'm leaning towards the 2022 team or 2023 team on offense. Yes, they'll lose Michael Mayer and Jarrett Patterson, but you're going to see Blake Fisher and Joe Alt kind of going into their prime years. Lorenzo Styles is going to go into a prime year. You're going to have your really talented freshmen. I mean, you're going to lose Avery Davis, Braden Lindsay, and Joe Wilkins probably, and replace them with Jaden Greathouse, Braylon James, Rico Flores, and potentially Ronan Hannafin. You're going to lose Michael Mayer, big loss, but it's not like you're going to be without talent. Eli Raridan is going to be going in to the next year. So he's going to be older. Kane Barong's going to be coming off an injury. Tyler Buckner's going into his second year as the starter. You're going to have your backfield is going to be more experienced. You're going to have Chris Tyree back. You're going to have Audric Estime. Logan Diggs is going to be healthy. Jadarian Price is going to be healthy. So Tobias Merriweather is going to be in year 2. So I think offensively, even with the loss of Patterson and Mayer and Lugg, I think the 2023 offense should be even more talented than the 2022 offense. I think it's the opposite on defense. I don't know who's going to replace Isaiah Foskey next year because you're not just losing Foskey. You're losing him. You're losing Justin Adamiola. You're losing Jason Adamiola. You're talking about losing Cam Hart. You're going to lose Tariq Bracy. You're going to lose some really good football players. And I don't know if the guys I don't know if there's an Eli Raridan ready to just step in at defensive end. Is Josh Burnham ready to be that guy in year 2? Is Aiden Gobira ready to be that guy in year 2? Now you'll have Keon Keeley, but he's going to still be a freshman. So he'll bring you kind of like what Dallas Turner brought to Alabama this year, but not necessarily a guy that's going to go out there and play 60 snaps a game. Maybe he gets to that point, but just right now, I think he's more of a really dynamic freshman, but still a freshman. Jason Adamiola, I mean, who's going to step in there? Is it going to be Gabriel Rubio? Is it going to be Jacob Lacey? Is it going to be Jason Onye? Is it going to be Tyson Ford? Is it going to be one of the incoming freshmen? So I just think there's a lot more questions about the defense in 2023. That's partly why I don't get into this whole, transition year conversation because a lot of and the other thing too is a lot of the guys that we think are going to be stepping into roles in 2023 on offense are guys we've seen before for the most part, except of like Eli Raridan. But when you look at the defense, it's a lot of guys that we just haven't seen a whole lot of. in college. So it's a little bit of a different scenario. So it's a really good question. Really good question. I enjoy questions like that. So got one from John A1. John says, who are your top 5 most talented all-purpose Notre Dame players? I got Tim Brown, Rocket Ismail, Golden Tate, Ricky Waters, and Theo Riddick. So most talented all-purpose. So I think the first 4 are no-brainers. I think those are I'd have to think about this, but I don't know if I would necessarily put Theo Riddick in there, because if we're going to say all-purpose Notre Dame players, I think you got to look at like a guy like Allen Rossum, who was a defensive player, but he was a defensive player that was a big-time punt returner and return. I believe he also returned kicks at Notre Dame. I think that you'd have to. I mean, I'm just trying to think through it. Like, do you put Joey Getherall in that conversation? He's probably not my top 5. I'd look at maybe an Arnez Battle, right? Didn't Arnez? I think I'm gonna look this up real quick. I thought Arnez, once he finally moved to wide receiver, I think he had some returns as well. David Givens. I mean, there's some really interesting. Receiving 58. Let's see here, kick returns. Yeah, he had 335 kick return yards on 16 returns in his last year at Notre Dame. Played quarterback, played receiver. But that 5th one, I'd have to really think about, John. I have to really think about, and I'm sure there's somebody that I'm forgetting, somebody that I'm missing as I kind of think through this list. I'm like, let's see here. I'm trying to think running backs, all purpose. Like I wouldn't put, I mean, do you put Julius Jones in there? I probably wouldn't, because Julius stopped returning kicks, I believe, later in his career. I could be wrong on that, but I believe he did. Trying to look into some different fellas that you could look at that were all-purpose guys. You mentioned, I'm just trying to have to think about this one. It was like Will Fuller's not that guy because he didn't return kicks or do anything other than catch. Now I'm trying to think of a defensive guy too. I mean, there's been some defensive guys that have been return men and done some different things. So Jeff Burris, somebody just mentioned Jeff Burris. That's a really good one. Because he did some things offensively. What I'm curious about Jeff Burris was, now obviously he had the rushing stats, but did he return kicks? Because if he returned kicks, then I'm going to jump him into the conversation. Yeah, he returned punts one year, 18 punts for 227 yards, averaged 12.6 per punt return. Also rushed for 10 touchdowns in his career, and he was very talented. So Michael, I think Michael had that one. I think that's a really good one. I like that one a lot. I definitely like that one. That's a really, I mean, because again, I like Theo Riddick a lot. I do. I love Theo, but I just don't know if I would put him in the, maybe you could say like most productive all around players, but I don't know if I'm putting Theo in the most talented of the 5 all around players. So that's why I'm going to go with the 5 that I went with. So that's my answer to that one. But John, really, really good question. I like that one quite a bit. Got some super chat questions here, Ryan. Perfect timing for you to come back. We got some recruiting conversation going on. Ryan Loftus with the super chat. Thank you, Ryan. With On3 updating their rankings to reflect 3 Notre Dame players earning a 5th star, how does Notre Dame not finish with a unanimous number 1 2023 class? So, number 1, not all of those guys are ranked as high. I would argue that, yes, they have some guys ranked higher than others. They have Peyton Bowen ranked as a 5-star, but this is the same outlet that also has Micah Bell as the 67th best player in the state of Texas.
And
those kind of misses balance out the positives, right? So like, Charles Jagsaw is ranked as the number 6 player in the country, but he's not quite that high by everybody else. Now his ranking is interesting because it is going up, because 247 also jumped him up from, I think, 64th to like 25th. So he's definitely going up, but Rival still has him 122nd and ESPN still has him 71st. There's a lot of variance. And as other guys are bumping up, right? So Micah Bell gets bumped up. Charles Jagsaw didn't get bumped up by On3. He got bumped up 1 spot. He was number 7 in the last ranking. So and Peyton Bowen was ranked pretty high too. He went from 37th to 18th, but they dropped Drake Bowen like 40 spots, right? Like they dropped, I think Christian Gray's another guy that saw a big jump. They dropped Brendan Vernon. I mean, so yes, there were some guys that moved up. Sullivan Absher went up 20 some spots. but other guys moved it down, and it somewhat balanced it out. The number one class I think some people are, Ryan, I think there's too many people just assuming they're not going to finish with a number one class. I'm not saying they will. We'll see how it goes. But I think they have a much better shot than a lot of people realize for a number of reasons. Assuming that the rankings people are honest in how they put together their final rankings, then yes, I do think Notre Dame has a shot to be number one. But I don't think it's definitely a no-brainer. It's because, again, how do they not finish with a unanimous number one class? Well, Alabama's just now starting to add guys to their class. Ohio State's class on paper is every bit as good as Notre Dame's. I think we can have a debate about that because I think Ohio State's got some overrated players like Luke Montgomery and Austin Sareveld and a couple guys like that. But they also have a couple guys that I'd say maybe should be Bryson Rogers. I think he's a little bit underrated. We've talked about him.
Yep.
So it just depends on how they put their class together. I mean, honestly, do they get Austin Novosad? Do they get Jeremiah Love? Do they get Ronan Hannafin? Do they get Jaden Alsbrim? And they got to hit all their numbers because they're going to have 24 to 25 guys, so they're going to have the volume. It's just about whether or not the rankings are done objectively, Ryan. That's my rant on it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was actually going to lead off with Micah Bell, right? It's like, because for every good ranking they have one that's just atrocious, right? Like if we're ranking guys where we believe they should be ranked, like if Micah Bell, for instance, was, what's fair, Brian, top 150 type of player,
Micah Bell?
Yeah.
At the lowest. Yeah. I mean, 150
like
because, you could look, we're going to focus on the floor, like SI 99, the SI All-Americans like that. They focus more on the floor than the ceiling. Well, in a ranking like that, you're not going to have Micah Bell top 50. You're going to have a more 90 to 120 kind of thing. You know what I mean? But that's just, 150 to me is the floor. But you don't have to have him 55th the way that 247 had him before, now 67th. I would probably have him closer to that. But, 150 is where the floor should be for that.
Yeah. So if we have players, because there's just some guys that are just so inappropriately ranked. Like if we're being completely honest. And I know that we can also look at the other side and say, like, well, Charles Jagusah is probably a little too high. And I'm fine with that conversation. But, Charles Jagusah being the 6th ranked player when he probably should be closer to maybe 40 or 50 is a lot different than having Micah Bell as a 3-star, right? Like that's criminal at that point. So I think that it's Ryan, to your question, great name again, by the way. I think I've said that to you before, but it's something where bad rankings are going to weigh down the good rankings, right? Like, Brian, did you say like kind of cancels out, right? Like, and that's kind of what happens, right? Is that it cancels out a little bit. So they're going to have a chance though. I keep telling people because it keeps coming in. I think number one class is going to be tough, but they're in the conversation. And I think a top 3 class, absolutely. Like, I think that I would be surprised unless, barring something crazy happening, that they don't have a top 3 class in the 2023 cycle. So I think that you made a great point that it's okay to be excited. I'm telling you, man, it's okay. It's okay to think that it could happen. All right. I understand you don't want to let yourself down and PTSD, and I get all that stuff, man, but it's a different staff. It's a different time. It's a different era.
Because what we've seen in the past, Ryan, is Notre Dame being ranked number one is not a new thing in recruiting. The 2021 class was ranked number one at one point. I believe last year's class got the number one at one point but it was always when they had like 12 guys and everybody else had 4. Sure. And I remember when Notre Dame got to like 13 and like the next closest team was like 4. And everybody kept saying, well, as other teams add more, they're going to catch Notre Dame. And to a degree, some have. But really only Ohio State because it's Ohio State and then no one else is even close to Notre Dame right now because the numbers are different. Bama's got 14 now. There's something 6 guys off, of course. In a points-driven, a cumulative points-driven thing, they're going to be lower. The difference, however, that people I don't think are taking into account of is the quality of what has been left on the board for Notre Dame compared to last year's. So, like in 2021, when Notre Dame was ranked number 1, they already had Tyler Buckner in the class. They already had Blake Fisher in the class. They already had Gabriel Rubio in the class. The only big name ranked guy they added was Prince Collie, who wasn't even ranked that high at the time. When you finally got all the guys on the board, Lorenzo Styles was committed really early. Deion Colsey committed early, eventually decommitted, came back into class. Kane Barong was in the class early. Most of your highly ranked guys were already in the class. And then you had a couple underrated guys who were good players. You added Audric Estime late. He was more of a 150 to 250 kind of guy on the consensus stuff. But you didn't have any Jaden Alsbury's on the board remaining. You didn't have a Jeremiah Love on the board remaining. You didn't have an Austin Novosad on the board remaining. You didn't have a Ronan Hannafin who's jumping up in the rankings on the board remaining. You didn't have a Samuel Mpemba on the board who you had a chance with. That's the difference. And then you go look at the guys they've added recently that in the past weren't there. You know, they've added Jaden Greathouse late. They've added Christian Gray late. They've added Micah Bell late. These guys that were ranked really high, they didn't add Charles Jagasol as early as they've added their top offensive lineman in the past. In the past, Blake Fisher was the first offensive lineman to commit, I believe, to Notre Dame. They were getting those guys early. In this instance, their best lineman signed or committed last.
Yep.
So it's just a different situation, and I don't think it's – and here's the other part too, big picture. If you look at where Notre Dame's projected to finish, barring somebody just jumping way up in the rankings, they're more close to 2 to 4 in regards to stacking up against past number one teams. I think that's part of the legitimate conversation as well. You know, right now Notre Dame, depending on who they sign – and some guys getting a bump, is most likely going to finish between like 298 to 300 points, which in some years gets them up to number 2 and other years has them 3 or 4.
Right.
The thing I think we're not taking into account, however, is that I don't see the path to 320 for a lot of teams that we've seen in recent years. Because unless there's just a bunch of flips to like one school, right? Like, I don't see a team signing 8 defensive linemen with the quality that A&M had last year, right? Like, that was a weird year. And if you look at it, if you look at the top 100, it was heavily like handed out to like 4 different teams, really 3 different teams, the way that the rankings were. This year, we're not seeing one team buy all the players, if we're going to assume that A&M did that, which I believe that they did. Legally, whatever, they bought the players. What we're seeing this year, however, as NIL is now a part of the entire process for this class, we're seeing more guys going to other schools not named Bama, Georgia, A&M, Ohio State for those type of deals, right?
Sure.
We're seeing them go to Miami. We think of Jaden Rashada and Jaden Wayne. You look at Tennessee and the guys they've been able to get. Yep. You know, you look, those are guys you see not Cedric Baxter. I always get him and Ruben Owens confused. But him going to Louisville instead of A&M. Why? Because of NIL. If NIL is not a thing, he's going to Texas or Alabama or Oklahoma or Texas A&M, right? So we're seeing more of the talent being spread out. And here's the other thing too. The fact that Notre Dame is doing what it's doing is also taking away from those teams. Keon Keeley, most likely, if Brian Kelly is the head coach at Notre Dame, the odds are good. Marcus Freeman's not the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame right now. That's the reality of it. I'm just being honest, okay? However, if in that scenario, you might lose a Keon Keeley. You don't land Peyton Bowen, in my opinion. If Marcus Freeman's just the defensive coordinator, I don't think they have Peyton Bowen in the class right now. He was the first kid to commit to Marcus Freeman. Now, maybe they get him, but maybe they get him, but I think the chances of him flipping are greater. You know, I don't think you have Jaden Greathouse. You don't have have Jaden Greathouse. You can replace him with Malik Elsie. You don't have Braylon James, right? Rico Flores said he doesn't come to Notre Dame. You'd have Cedric Irvin as your running back. You know, you'd have Brooks Barr as one of your defensive linemen. You probably don't have either Boubacar or, you know, one of those guys. You'd still have Brennan Vernon. You know, you'd probably still have Drake Bowen, but Drake loves Marcus Freeman. If Marcus Freeman leaves, it's not a given that Drake stays, because that was a big reason he stayed. Now, he's fallen in love with Notre Dame now. The point being, Ryan, the class doesn't look the way it did. And where would most of those guys have gone? Keon would probably be at Alabama, right? I mean, Jade Lamar might be at USC. You know, you look at Christian Gray would be at LSU or Ohio State, right? I mean, so Peyton Bowen would be at Oklahoma or Alabama, right? I mean, so the schools that were getting those guys are not getting them because they're going to Notre Dame. I mean, Notre Dame has beaten several kids at Alabama once, or has kept from Alabama from getting or flipping guys that they would normally get or flip.
Sure.
Miami is taken away from those teams. Clemson is bouncing back with getting some big time kids that they were missing the last couple years. You're looking at Tennessee getting some of those kids. So I just think the talent is being spread out a little bit more evenly this year. So I don't think you're going to see a team finish number one with like 320 points like we have in past years. So I think that's got to be factored into this equation as well when you look at the potential for it.
We've talked a lot about the quarterback carousel too. There's a lot of big time programs that do not have a top ranked quarterback right now. I mean, like LSU and Texas A&M and Ohio State and Notre Dame included in that. But the point of the matter is that there is some guy. I mean, right now Alabama has 2 quarterbacks that are viewed as top 10 quarterbacks in the class, right? Like I know there's the one situation with the Longergan kid, like if he's going to play baseball over playing football, but it's just there's an imbalance, I guess, of power a little bit in this class. Like it's odd. It's an odd year for me to come.
You say balance of power?
More imbalance.
Imbalance?
Yeah.
So
it's like it's because like I think that there's a lot of irregularities in this class. It's like you see a lot of those big name programs that don't have a top quarterback. You're seeing guys that you would typically just kind of pencil in. Like most years, I think that Peyton Bowen is just Oklahoma, like that's just like that's easy, right? And I think that there's some other players. I mean, like you said, Keon is a Florida kid. Like usually that kid probably stays in SEC, like honestly.
So you're saying actually there is a balance of power because it's being more spread out, right? Is that what you're saying?
Not really. I think it's an imbalance because like the balance of power would be that Alabama gets all their guys.
No, see, I think it's an imbalance of powers when it's narrowed into because there's not the powers imbalanced into a small number of teams. We're going to have a horrible conversation.
I guess the power that I'm talking about is not the power of the.
It's not normally going where it normally goes.
Yeah, I'm saying that the recruiting powers that you would think of are the Alabamas. So, it's an imbalance because
looking at it from like a historical type, the 3 superpowers are not getting the things that they're normally getting. Okay,
correct. Yeah, correct.
Yep. Yeah, so we're seeing the power spread out more. We're seeing the elite talent spread out more. Yes, I agree with you on that. Yeah, I think that's a big part of this too, as we look at what the numbers are going to look like.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation, Ryan. It really is. It really is. Jonathan Gabrick, and look, here's the last thing of this. There's going to be flips. I mean, but here's the question. To your point, are the flips that maybe some of those schools are the ones that actually lose some kids to flips to big NIL deals later? Or are they then going to will the flips kind of restore things back to the hierarchy of, okay, we let you have your fun, but come signing day, we're going to get this guy back in our class, right? That's going to be a really interesting part of these next 6 to 8 months when you look at the 2 different signing dates. Jonathan Gabrick says, thank you for the super chat, Jonathan. Going to my first Notre Dame game this year, versus Cal this year. Any fun pregame festivities, sites to see, things I should do to get the full Notre Dame experience?
100%. A lot.
Yes,
there's a lot to do.
On top of stopping by to see us at the Irish Breakdown get together, I have yet to see this, but my wife said it is an absolute must do. It's the Trumpets Under the Dome. I would imagine this year we'll probably see it back to being indoors. I think, but that's a must get. I always tell people, if you're going to come to Notre Dame for the first time, make it a weekend. Don't just come for the game. Make it a weekend. There's going to be pep rallies. I don't know if they're going to do the pep rally every week this year, though. That's something I heard. Get a chance to see the Basilica. You got to go to the grotto, right? I'm not Catholic, but I like to go to the grotto and pray. There's no rule that says you have to be Catholic to pray at the grotto. It's cool to light a candle. I think that's just kind of a cool experience. Then there's the lake to walk around. You get to go to the admin building, see the Golden Dome. You get to walk around, see the library. But there's a lot of cool things that you get to experience too that are part of it. Like I said, make sure when the player walk happens. That's a pretty cool thing, I think, for fans to experience.
That's number one for me. No matter how many times I'm going to be there, I'm always going to check out the player.
That's because Ryan's evaluating. He's like, okay, broad shoulders. Oh yeah, he checks. But seriously, as a Notre Dame fan, it's a pretty cool thing. Yeah. And if you have a little one, a lot of times, like the little kids will stick their hands out. Those are the kids that the Notre Dame players will like to give fives to and stuff like that. They're really good about that kind of stuff. I think those are just some of the things to see. When the band comes in, that's another cool deal too. When the band walks into the stadium, That's a really cool deal. So those and look, other people in this chat, I guarantee you're going to throw some stuff in to check out. But the Trumpets Under the Dome, I think, is definitely one. The Grotto is definitely one. The Player Walk are just the things off the top of my head that you really have to experience and really have to do, in my opinion.
Completely. Agree. Grotto, number one for me, especially if it's a night game, because then when you walk out, it's all illuminated.
Oh, that's
it
really
looks
cool.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Player Walk is a must. I mean, honestly, Jonathan, I wouldn't get into the stadium until super late. I would just walk around, and you're going to experience so many things. Go into the, even if you don't drink, like just go tailgate with some of the fans at points. Like it's just such a cool experience. It really is.
It is. I've been to some really cool tailgates at Notre Dame, and I don't drink, and people are really cool, especially if you're wearing Notre Dame gear. Really cool, really receptive. It really is a lot of fun. Casa Hodge with a super chat. Thank you very much for that. When Notre Dame offered Ben Minich, means they feel Caleb Downs probably not coming to Notre Dame, even though they're not stopped recruiting him until his decision date. I would say they're going to recruit him well past his decision date, but it just they also know if the message we've given now hasn't hit yet, why would all of a sudden things change? I would say I'd keep recruiting him just in case you have the kind of season that would result in him flipping. I'll ask you this, Ryan. So I think I just answered that question, right? They will keep recruiting him. They haven't stopped recruiting him, but they also are realistic. They know that they're probably not going to get him, right? Barring him having a change of heart between now and July 27th, they're not going to get him, right? When you look at the players that I think that they're going to continue recruiting, I don't think they're going to necessarily try to flip a lot of guys. I do think if I was Notre Dame, I would still recruit Jason Moore. And I'd still recruit Caleb Downs for sure. Who are some other guys that assuming Notre Dame gets the guys that we think they're going to get, is there anybody else besides those two that you would say I would still continue to try to recruit if you're Notre Dame?
That's an interesting question. I mean, personally, and I think that bridge has kind of just been burnt, but I would keep committed. I would keep going after Monroe Freeling, but I just don't think that that's in the cards personally. Jason Moore is the big one for me. And I like that you mentioned him. Like I would just keep at it in that one, My other thought was, is there a wide receiver that's off the board that I would really like to get back into the conversation with? I'm not sure if there's one that makes total sense, especially to be honest.
Especially if they get Ronan Hannafin.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if they get Ronan, then it's kind of a moot point at that point. The only other one I think that's an interesting one is I would keep talking to Deuce Robinson. I would, because this is how it's kind of gone. You were in an okay position early, you stopped talking to him, and then you got in a little too late. Like that's what it kind of seems. But hey, let's keep moving now, because even though you got in too late, you can still put in that work, man. And then if they see if you keep selling hey, look what Michael Mayer's doing, right? Get 1,000 yards, All-American, all that good stuff, then maybe you can get into the conversation. Probably not, but I would still make the phone call. I 100% would.
You know who else I would still recruit, and they'd have to start because they've stopped? I would have kept recruiting AJ Harris, especially if you think you're going to be really good this year. I still would have kept recruiting him. Alberto, our friend from Spain, thank you for your super chat. Woohoo! Finally made it live after a few shows. I hope all is well with everyone. If any of you ever come to southern Spain, you have a place to stay. I appreciate that. I've always wanted to go to Europe. As everybody knows, I'm a big history major. We have a World War II question that we're going to be getting to here later, Ryan, because it is Friday free for all. So I am looking forward to that. But I've always wanted to kind of tour Europe and just see some of the different historical sites. I've always wanted to go, like France, the beaches of Normandy in France. I've always wanted to see that. There's always some different cool things. So I think my first trip to Europe will probably be next year in August for the Notre Dame Navy game. So I'll be going to Ireland. That'll be in Ireland to start the season. So that'll be my first trip to Europe. Although it's not technically not continental Europe. It's one of the islands, but I'll still be a pretty cool deal.
So we have a World War II question.
We do. We'll get to that.
Is there a food related question yet?
We'll see. I'm not quite there yet. So we've got a lot of questions. We got some really, really great ones today, though, there. But you guys are doing a great job so far. Stonador had a question, Ryan, and this came up earlier, but I passed it over earlier because I wanted to get your opinion on this. As also a general college football question, do you think the college football committee ever picked the wrong 4 teams? So, Ryan, I have to first ask, what
Yes.
would you consider the wrong for? Because there's two ways of looking at it. A
Mhm.
lot of people will say, well, clearly they didn't get it wrong with Ohio State because Ohio State won it. And my
Sure.
whole thing is the wrong four is more about, did you pick the wrong four no matter what happened after the fact? Because I
Mhm.
think then you can get into, well, Oklahoma got beat by 40 something by LSU. They clearly shouldn't have been in it. Well, no, they still should have been in it. They just clearly weren't good enough. So when I think about it, obviously the first one, the most controversial to me still remains what they did to TCU at the end of the 2014 season. They
Was that with
jumped them in the
Boykin?
top,
Boykin a quarterback?
believe so, but they jumped them into
Yeah.
the top four. They go
Mhm.
out and beat Iowa State 55-3, and not only dropped behind Ohio State, but dropped behind Baylor. The justification was, well, Baylor won head to head. Well, the dumb part about that is Baylor beat them head to head weeks before, and they still had
Mhm.
TCU ahead. And then Baylor goes out and wins a game that was not necessarily against a team that was that great that final weekend, and they jumped them. I thought
Mhm.
that was wrong. Now, no one argues about that as much because of the fact that Ohio State went and won it all. But to me, it still should have mattered. If you didn't belong to be, it's because like then you could say, well, what about the 16 USC team? They could have jumped into the playoff and played with anybody, but
Mhm.
that they still didn't belong there. No matter how they were playing in November, they still didn't belong there. I think that for me is probably the most uh,
Egregious.
yeah, yeah, it is for me. I'll say this.
Mhm.
My counter to that, however, is I still I wish Ohio State would have played some better teams early in 15 because even though Michigan State beat them head to head, and I get it, and I don't think they were wrong, I still don't think they got the best four teams. But it's the resume for Michigan State that year was much better. Uh, but Ohio State was the better team. And I know Michigan State beat them head to head. That was such a weird game. That Ohio State team in 15 was the biggest. Like, you talk about coaches that just don't take advantage of their talent. The fact that Urban Meyer only won one national championship is a knock on his resume, in my opinion,
Mhm.
because there were several years at Ohio State where I was like, there's not two teams in college football with a better roster than what Ohio State has right now. And that 15 team had as good of a roster as we've seen in college football in the playoff era, in my opinion. I mean, it's top two or three, not that year, Ryan. I'm talking about
Mhm.
overall. I mean, think about the dudes they had on that football team in 2015. It's absurd to think of the talent they had in 2015, but they just, they didn't make it. So what are some other ones, Ryan, for you that you look at and say, yeah, I think they got that wrong. I think they got it wrong. These teams should have been in that year. Do you have any
I'm
others?
not really. I mean, I'm looking through the years. I mean, the 2014 Florida State team. How is that team 13-0 and only the third seed? I'm
Because they
sorry.
beat
I'm just
nobody.
beat nobody that
Their
year.
schedule was really soft. They played a lot of ugly games.
Was that the year? Was that the year after they won with
Yeah,
Jameis? Was that? Okay,
yeah,
and they got
yep,
destroyed against
yep,
Oregon. Yeah, got it.
yep.
Remember that team
Their
now.
resume was garbage. It really
Yep.
was. Michigan State was not one of the four best teams in the country that year, but man, their resume was really impressive. It really
Hmm.
was. I just kind of felt like there were other teams, in my opinion, that were just better. But the
Hmm.
problem is when you're going to go to resume. Look, I'll take the 2015 Stanford team was a much better team than Michigan State, but the reality is that Stanford team had two losses, including a road loss to begin the season at Northwestern.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go off of not the best team, but the teams with the best resumes, I honestly don't have a lot of hangups, and
No.
this is part of the reason I'm sort of against this whole expanded playoff thing, because I'm like, name me a year that there was teams that should have been in beyond the top 2 to 3. You say, well, Michigan State shouldn't have got in. Okay, cool. Who should have? Because there's a lot of flawed teams. Like 2016, a lot of people said, well, Washington wasn't a very good team. Somebody else should have made it over Washington. Who? A two-loss Ohio State team Well, they were in, right?
And what?
2000,
And
and
Washington was 12-1, weren't they? They were a good
yeah, but
team.
they weren't that
Yeah.
good. I mean, the
Uh-huh.
Pac-12 was down. I mean, that's the perception, but they weren't a very good team. I thought they gave Alabama one of the more competitive playoff games that Alabama's had that they didn't lose.
Jake Browning was winning. Jake Browning touchdown pass to
Yeah.
start that game.
But like Penn State won the Big Ten. Yeah, they had 2 losses, including a loss to Pitt, and they got beat by Michigan 49-10. I don't care if you won the Big Ten. You weren't one of the 4 best teams. Yes, you beat Ohio State head-to-head, but it's about the overall resume. It's not just about conference champions. ESPN loves to focus on conference champions should be in. That's only because ESPN carries all the conference championship games. That's the only reason that matters to them. It should not be, in my opinion, a driving force. But that's the whole thing is like, you're going to give it to USC. USC beat Washington late in the year convincingly at Washington, but USC also had 3 losses in September, including a 50-plus point loss to Alabama. So what's the criteria? And I think that's what makes this thing challenging. You could argue Oklahoma in 2016 was a really good team by the end of the year, but they lost to Ohio State by 21 at home, and they got beat by 10 by Houston. So I don't care how they were playing in the final month of the season. They didn't have a resume that belonged. So there's just never been a year that I thought that there was legitimate teams. 2017, a lot of people will argue there was other teams should have got in. People have said that Alabama didn't belong in. Ohio State did. Ohio State had 2 losses. Remember, Kirk Herbstreit, I think, was one of the ones advocating for the 2017 Ohio State team to get in the college football playoff.
I wonder why he did that.
Exactly. But I'm like, they had 2 losses, including a 30-plus point loss at Iowa. Right? They also lost by 15 at home to Oklahoma. No, they didn't belong. Was that a great Alabama team? No. But they still had a better resume than Ohio State, and then there was others UCF should have got in. Based on what? Like, okay, it's a fun story. But what was UCF's best win that year? It was Georgia Tech. I think that they said that game got canceled, right? I'm looking at it now because it was Hurricanes.
That 3-year span was so annoying with the group of 5 teams. Remember, the year before it was Western Michigan, then it was UCF back-to-back years undefeated.
Western Michigan couldn't beat Wisconsin, a decent Wisconsin team in the Cotton Bowl. That UCF team was a good football team. They beat Auburn. Auburn had 4 losses that year, and UCF beat them by a touchdown. So I don't know if I'd say that they did get it wrong. 2018 Ohio State could beat anybody except Purdue in the middle of October at West Lafayette, right? I mean, that's what I love about the playoff, and what I love about the smaller playoff is one bad day, one bad night in West Lafayette in October can knock out your chance to play for a championship. That's why college football regular season to me is still the best. So, Ryan, I honestly don't know if I could say that they've gotten it wrong. I really don't know, other than the first year, and that year is controversial to say that because, the team that they quote unquote got wrong won the title. So, it's a little interesting.
Brian, can I bring up one comment real quick?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. This type of stuff drives me crazy a little bit. Isaac Cody said UCF beat Auburn, who beat both Alabama and Georgia that year in the regular season. Cody, Isaac, this is no disrespect, but I hate those arguments so much, man. It's like, okay, but UCF, you're telling me that UCF would have beat Alabama that year? Is that what you're trying to sell to me? Just because they beat a team that beat a team that beat a team?
I mean, we could do some really weird mental gymnastics to get to that. I mean, there's been years where, this team beat this team who lost to that team who lost to 4-8 such and such. So 4-8 such and such could beat, this other team. I mean, the best year for that? The best year for that is 2016. 2016 is the absolute best year for that because you look at Clemson won the title, right? They lost to Pitt. Pitt lost to Northwestern. So Northwestern lost to Illinois State. So could Illinois State have won the national championship that year? No, that's not how it works, right? Northwestern lost to Western Michigan and Illinois State, but they beat Pitt, and Pitt beat Clemson at Clemson. Clemson beat Bama. You know what I mean? Like it's not how it works. But
Oh, if they
yeah.
gave the Redbirds a chance, I think they
Yeah.
could have pulled it off that year.
I'm gonna say no. I'm going to say no. I think to Isaac's point, though, I think that's legitimate if those things are done in the regular season. I will say that. Like
Okay.
if UCF would have beat Auburn in the regular season, we'd have a different conversation because bowl games are a unique animal. There's a month afterwards for preparation. You know, not everybody takes a bowl game, views a bowl game the same way. This isn't like week 3 where you went and beat Auburn at Auburn, right? So like to me, anytime you're going to use what happened in a bowl game to justify what you should have gotten, I have a harder time with that in this scenario. With when you talk about the group of fives, it's kind of like Boise State, right? When they beat Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl. Well, look what they did, this, and this. It's like, yeah, but could they have done that for 12 games against that level of competition? No, they couldn't have. And that's the thing is UCF wouldn't have been in position to beat Auburn if they had to play an SEC schedule that year. They would have had a couple losses. And that's my point. It's just I just can't take a like Cincinnati last year. Do I think Cincinnati was one of the 4 best teams in college football? No. Do I think they belong to the college football playoff? Yes, because they went on the road and beat Notre Dame convincingly. If UCF would have had a win like that in 2017, then we could have had a different conversation, right? But you didn't. And that's why I just, I have a hard time jumping on that UCF bandwagon. Because the other thing, too, is UCF put their schedule together. And they can say all they want about, well, no one would play us, blah, 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 blah. You're the ones that chose to play Georgia Tech and Maryland. That was your choice. The teams would have played you. Boise played Georgia. They played Virginia Tech. They had teams play them. So it is what it is. But yeah, it was really annoying to listen to that. The media hyped that up. During that whole
I was
thing.
in Orlando during their national title victory that they proclaimed. It was pretty funny.
Yeah. Yep. That would have been very fun to watch. All right, let's get to some more. Here's a Hawk strongest. If Notre Dame is undefeated, will Tyler Buchner be in the Heisman race?
If he's putting up great numbers, sure.
Well, here's the thing.
Numbers. Yeah.
Here's my question, Ryan. That's a given. My question is actually more specific to this particular team. Mm-hmm. Do you think he has to? Because again, yes, if they're undefeated and he's putting up great numbers, yes. If they're undefeated and he's putting up Everett Golson 2012 numbers, no. Right? Mm-hmm. My question is more specific to: do you think he has to put up those kind of numbers for Notre Dame to be undefeated going into the postseason? I think that's a more specific. I kind of think he does have to put up numbers that are at least going to get you in the conversation. I don't think you can beat Ohio State and Clemson and USC and BYU and North Carolina on the road and BC if Tyler Buchner's playing like Everett Golson did, in 2012. Meaning Everett played well, but Everett, like Brian Kelly said, Everett was kind of riding on the bus, not driving the bus. I think this team, with the schedule they play, needs Everett Golson or needs Tyler Buchner to be, the passing version of Everett from 2012 and the running version of Brandon Wimbush from 2017. I just think that's what they need because of some of the other parts of the team and the way that the schedule is. And I could be wrong, but I think they need him to be to where at least because he doesn't have to put up Bryce Young numbers. He's at Notre Dame. If he's like yesterday, if he does what I said, you said he throws for about 3,000 yards and he rushes for about 500 or 600 yards and Notre Dame's undefeated, there's a good chance he's going to be in the top 5. Sure. Don't you think? I mean, freaking Ian Book finished 9th in Heisman voting and he threw 15 touchdown passes. I mean, so when you're the quarterback at Notre Dame, you're going to get that hype. You're going to get that hype. That's true. Some shade, but it's also accurate. Trip Bergen, do you guys see Notre Dame offering any other 23 guys? And who would be their main targets of trying to flip kids from other schools? I guess we kind of already addressed that second part earlier, Ryan. Yeah. Jason Moore, Caleb Downs, those guys. But do you see them offering any other 23 guys?
Not until the season. I think that we could see a board expansion at some point, depending on breakout players during the season, guys that got onto your radar, like those types of players. So like during the evaluation period during the season, I think is like when you might see a couple more offers, but I think you're most likely done for the summer, but I think the season could be a spot for that potentially.
Yeah, and would you obviously if they have misses with a couple, Ronan Haniff and a couple guys, I think you're going to have to expand your board a little bit.
Sure.
If you have some of those misses, but as of right now, if they get the guys they get, I'm with Ryan on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an interesting one, Ryan. I'm very curious to hear your answer on this. I actually have some pretty strong opinions on this. Tyler Evans says, besides Marcus Freeman, who is the biggest coaching hire and biggest head scratching hire this offseason?
Man, there's a lot of weird ones. I was looking at this one before. There was all right. So I'll preface this one by saying I think he's a really good defensive coach, but like I'm not so sure about Dan Lanning in Oregon. I wouldn't say it's a head scratcher per se, because there were definitely other ones where I was just kind of like, huh. But I think I'll start with the one that I like the most is I really do like Mario Cristobal in Miami.
That's mine.
Yeah, I think that one's just such an easy fit. I think he's going to recruit at a high level. Is he a great in-game coach? No, but I think that you can. I mean, I think the U is pretty easy to sell, right? Like you can sell that program to getting some top talent back into that building. So I like that one. Long term, I like Billy Napier in Florida. I think it's going to be something that's going to have to be built up from the ground floor, but it's something where I do like it. And the biggest head scratcher. I'm not going to throw shade at Brian Kelly. I'm not going to do it.
It's on there. I mean, it's on there.
It's on there for you.
Oh, I mean, so I'm going to disagree with something you said.
Okay.
I don't think Miami's an easy sell.
Really?
It's not a hard sell, but it's not an easy sell. Miami doesn't have great facilities. Their game field's like 30 to 45 minutes away. There's some things that work against them. So it's not an easy sell, but it's not a hard sell, but it's not easy either. I think it's a lot like Notre Dame. You need the right guy. I do think it's a unique place because also you don't get a lot of support from an administration. There's a question we'll get to here that kind of is along with that I'm going to try to find as I'm explaining this, because somebody asked a question that was very similar to this. Here we go, from Christopher Crosby. He said, why doesn't the U put more money into their program? They're sitting on a potential gold mine with that brand. What went wrong since they were a powerhouse in college football? Well, obviously, a lot of the sanctions hurt them, but they had a school that they went through a period like Notre Dame went through with Lou Holtz, where they just didn't want to be a great football program because they wanted to be an academic school. They like to call it, was it like the Harvard of the South? They'd always call themselves, or something like that. And they de-emphasize football, and that made it harder to sell because it actually is a really good school. And so I think that makes it a little bit harder. Now, if the school was on board, Ryan, with football being good, then the conversation would be different, and I would agree with you. But I think that is kind of where I'm coming from on that. But I do agree with your premise. That even adds more to why I think Mario Cristobal was a great hire. Because I mean, he played there. He's from there. I think he's a much better coach than Manny Diaz. I think Manny Diaz is an incredibly overrated defensive coordinator, much less head football coach. Sure. And he was in over his head. I think Mario Cristobal, the fact that a guy from Miami who played at Miami, coached at Florida International and Alabama, could go to Oregon and have the recruiting success he had there, says a lot about what he's going to do at Miami. And we're already seeing it. And because he's an alum, he's also able to tap into some of the booster money that is there. And so I think that's a big part of it too. So I think the Mario Cristobal hire was phenomenal. I get why Oregon hired Dan Lanning, but it was a huge risk. It was the most boom or bust decision of the offseason. I didn't love here's the thing. The Florida thing is really weird for me. I understand why they hired Billy Napier. I get it. I don't have a problem with it. I have a problem with the way in which they forced Dan Mullen out. And like, you're in the SEC title game like the previous 2 years. You have one bad year, and there has to be more to it than what we've been told.
There has to be more to it
than what we're told, because that was such a weird situation. But of the guys that were out there, I liked the Napier hire.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't necessarily love the way it got there, if that
That's
makes
fair.
sense.
That's fair.
I think the
Can I?
Bryant. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to throw out one other weird one. I was just looking through some. Joe Moorhead taking over the Akron
Yeah,
head coaching position. I
he
was just
just
kind of
wanted to be a
like,
head coach again. That's the thing.
yeah,
And
that was just
when
a
he
weird one to
had
jump on.
the health issues that he had during the season, were going to make it impossible for a Power 5 team to take a chance on him. And he wanted to be a head coach again. And I think, and he's an East Coast guy. So I think that's why he did it. But yeah, it's like, dude, you just could have rode out being an OC for a couple more years. You might have got a little bit something better in Akron.
Mm-hmm.
Here, look, I know it's impossible for people to think I'm unbiased on the subject, and I understand. But the LSU Brian Kelly hire didn't make a lot of sense to me. It was a very strange hire, and honestly, it was a panic hire in my opinion, because LSU thought they were going to get Napier, and he barely gave them the time of day. They thought they were going to get Lincoln Riley, and he, did what he did and went to USC. At that point in time, it's like, who are you going to get? Like you're stranded there. Like, who are you going to get? And I think they panicked. And then there's the connection, the agent for the ADs, the same agent, I believe, for the head, for Brian Kelly and all this other kind of stuff. Notre Dame's 11-1. They're in the playoff contention. Like, Notre Dame was a hot team. They'd beaten LSU twice. I think that they panicked and were like, well, yeah, this is a big name coach. And they didn't take into account that he's a horrible fit there, number one. And the other part, like, Cincinnati's the most southern place he's ever coached. Notre Dame's the second most southern place he's ever coached. And you look at it and you say, boy, that's a bad fit. And then you look at where he is in his career, where he's like bragging about how hard he works on the recruiting trail by FaceTiming 3 prospects. Like, that's a lunch hour for Marcus Freeman. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it was a horrible fit. And I just don't think Brian Kelly's at that stage in his career where he's going to be prepared to handle all the stuff that goes along with being the head football coach at Notre Dame. If he thought it was hard to handle all that stuff at Notre Dame with the button-up kids he has and the type of stuff he goes through at Notre Dame, where at Notre Dame he doesn't have to do anything with academics. Like, Notre Dame is one of the easiest schools for football coaches to deal with academics, because Notre Dame has a whole institute, like a whole operation that they tell the football coaches what's going on. At LSU, at Ohio State, the football coaches have to handle that stuff, right? And so he's in for a very rude awakening, in my opinion. And you can't be gone for 5 months out of the year, which he was at Notre Dame, at LSU, or you're going to come back and it's going to be like, what the heck is, like, stuff's on fire, like the things are burning down. It's like, hyperbolically, but it's going to be a disaster, in my opinion. It really is.
Well, there was a lot of bad stuff happening at LSU before Brian Kelly even got there. So
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
That's what I'm saying. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be ugly. Good question. Brandon Plensner asked, do you guys honestly believe there's a legit quarterback battle? And do you feel Marcus Freeman should name Buckner the starter before fall camp? Why or why not?
I think that how Marcus Freeman has gone about everything is everything's about competition, right? So, I mean, Tyler Buckner needs to earn it. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Do I think ultimately it's going to be a tough decision? No, I don't. I think that Tyler Buckner has separated himself in the spring, and I think he'll continue to separate himself. But I don't, Brandon, I don't think Marcus Freeman in his mind has said, like, oh, I'm just going to give someone something, right? If Tyler Buckner at a certain point has earned that position, then I think that he'll pull the trigger at that point. But I don't think that he's going to skate away from competition just because it's the quarterback position. So I do think that they are going to try to institute that competition, quote unquote, but I don't think ultimately it's going to be much of a competition.
Mm-hmm. We had a follow-up question, Ryan. First of all, do I think there's a legit quarterback battle? Yes, from the standpoint of Tyler Buckner still has work to do to earn the starting job. He has far outplayed Drew Pine so far, but that's only 15 of what will be over 40 total practices that will be put into determining that. I hope that he's named it quickly. I don't think Tyler Buckner should have been named the starter yet, because I don't think he's done enough, especially when he missed the spring game with an injury. Now, I don't think he did anything wrong to miss that, but the fact is he missed it. That's a data point. I don't think he's done anything to lock it down where he should be named the starter. To your point as well, that flies in the face of everything Marcus Freeman's been about so far, which is competition, competition, competition. You're not going to give Drew Pine a single practice before you name the starter, right? I just don't. Now, does Tyler Buchner go in as the number one? Yeah. Does Drew have to catch him? Does Steve Angeli have to catch him? Yes. But they deserve to have that competition, just like you're going to have it every other. Like, he's not going to walk in and declare, okay, I'm naming Joe Alt my starting left tackle. We all just kind of know, and now Joe's got to go earn it and keep it, right? You know, I don't think that I understand why it's done. I just don't think we need to be propping quarterback battles on this pedestal like we've always done, where, you know, when is he going to name Josh Lugg the starting right guard? When is he going to name Chris Tyree the number one running back? You know, no one's asking that question, right? We'll figure it out when it's determined. I think the same thing at quarterback. I think Tyler's got a lot to prove. We all think he's going to win it, but I think here's the deal too, Ryan. Even if you know he is hands down your best quarterback, I still want to see how he handles this battle going into fall. There's a lot of evaluation mentally and from a leadership standpoint. Does Tyler just keep going out making plays, or do you start to see a more vocal Tyler Buchner in fall camp? Does a more vocal Tyler Buchner, is he as effective? Does it hurt his game? There's still a lot we need to learn about Tyler Buchner, that even if you think he's going to be the guy, I'm not removing that roadblock from in front of him yet, because I want to see him climb it still.
Sure.
And that's part of it. So that's where I'm at on that. So it is a battle, but it's not like in past where it's like, you know, Deshaun and Malik, where it's like two really good guys that are really close. I mean, Tyler's been the better quarterback, and Drew had a bad spring, not just a bad spring game. He had a bad spring, and that factored into it as well. So yes, there should be a battle, in my opinion. There was a follow-up to the conversation we were having. Jay Henry said Tony Elliott at Virginia was odd to me as well.
I agree.
Can you explain that? Because I've heard a lot of people. So what I would say is, I don't think if like this would have happened a couple years ago, I don't think it would have had the same weird reaction that people have had. I think the timing of it was bad because they were coming off such a disappointing season. But if like after the 18 or 19 season, when Clemson was considered really good and he was the OC then, I think people would be lauding it, but because they just weren't good this year, I think there's a lot of kind of shaking your head about like, well, that's kind of a strange hire. Why do you think that was an odd hire?
I mean, you just answered it. Honestly, it's the timing of everything, right? Like I think I think their perception, and I think it is a little bit of reality, is the fact that I don't think Tony Elliott did a very good job as the offensive coordinator this past year. I think that he had a lot of talent on his offense, but he was trying to put square pegs in round holes all season, you know, like trying to make DG Uiagalelei Trevor Lawrence and expecting him to do Trevor Lawrence things. So I think, again, to your point, if he was riding the momentum and then he got a job like Virginia, I'd be like, cool, that's fine. Like, I get it. But I mean, you just had a guy that I think really struggled as a coach. And then all of a sudden he is, you know, just takes over as an ACC school all of a sudden, you know? So I think it is the timing of everything. Like, there was no momentum for him to ride into the University of Virginia head coaching job, and it still happens.
Right. I get it. I just think the fit is actually okay there. If he's going to be a head coach, I think Virginia's a place where I think he could actually have a little bit of success.
I just hope Brendan Armstrong's not running QB power next year.
That's my God, that'd be that. And here's the thing, you know, my stance on Tony Elliott. I'm not a huge Tony Elliott fan. I actually think he's going to be a better head coach than he was a coordinator. I do. I think he was. I think he was better. I think he was better at the. Here's why I think him and Jeff Scott were pretty good. I think Jeff Scott was a little bit better of the X's and O's guy, game plan guy. I think Tony Elliott was better from a structure, organization type of thing. And when Jeff Scott left, the X's and O's weren't as good. But I do think Tony Elliott's a good coach in the other areas, which is why I think he could actually be a better head coach than he was a coordinator if he can make good hires. That's ultimately the key to any head coach. If you can't make good hires, you're just not going to be a good football coach. And I honestly haven't studied his staff enough at UVA to be able to say whether he did or didn't do that at Virginia. But to me, that is the interesting aspect of it. For me, is some guys are just that way, Ryan. You know, some guys are better head coaches than they are coordinators. Like, I'm very curious to see one of the most, well, yeah, that makes sense hires. I can't say that it's going to be good or not, because I just have no clue how good of a coach he's going to be.
Mhm.
But the Brent Venables one is an interesting one for me because it's kind of like on paper it makes sense. Former Oklahoma
Sure.
guy, you're taking it in a completely different direction than what you were for Lincoln Riley, which I think is smart. When you've had a guy do that, I don't think you want to go look the next Lincoln Riley. I think you want to find the polar opposite of Lincoln Riley.
That's fair.
So in a lot of those ways, I have no issue with what Oklahoma did. I just have no clue if it's going to work or not because he's
I have
such an
0
uncertain.
idea.
He's such an. I mean, is he going to be the same guy as a head coach that he was as a defensive coordinator? If he is, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
But it's just I don't know, but I understand why they did it, and it made a lot of sense to me.
I think that the fit did make sense from a lot of the reasons that you said, right? Like Oklahoma guy trying something different. Cool, I get that. He just doesn't, there's like an aura around guys though, where I'm just like, does he seem like a head coach? Like, and I
Right.
don't know. Venables just doesn't strike me as a head coach. We'll see.
Agree.
And then,
That's what I'm saying. Like if he acts the
Yeah.
same way that he does the coordinator, it's just not going to work.
but like his
But
comments the other day were a
yeah.
little great start.
Odd.
Yes.
Odd.
Odd's a word. Odd is a
Yeah.
word for that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very strange. Very, very strange. So many great questions today, guys. You guys are absolutely killing it with these questions. Super chat from Connor Patton. Thank you, Connor, very much. Will the new salary give BK a sugar high before he settles back into his usual self? Hey, look, was there anything more fitting than on the same day that LSU releases, the same day that the Michael Mayer thing comes out, right? And it's like, I don't even think this was planned. This is just how, Brian Kelly's absolutely clueless. The stuff that Michael Mayer comes out about how he was never around, that same day LSU releases a workout tape that has nothing to do with Notre Dame. They released a workout video of them in the stadium running and all that other kind of stuff. What also gets put on social media that day? A picture of Brian Kelly and his daughter at the golf course, and she spans over to him, and he's doing the silly dance at the golf course. Could you I can't even troll you as hard as you're trolling yourself right now.
Man.
You know what I mean? Like it just is like if that didn't sum up that Brian Kelly has settled in quite nicely to his usual self. It's like because like he upped his recruiting game last year. We talked about this last year. When after Marcus Freeman was hired, within about a month, Brian Kelly was upping his recruiting game because he had to, because he was getting embarrassed by Marcus Freeman.
Mhm.
And so he did a better job. But, but he still was that same guy in the other areas. And that's how he's going to be at LSU. He's still the same guy that instead of putting into work, I mean, dude, we're a couple weeks away from season starting, and he's been playing golf all off season. It's just, that's just who he is. I mean, that's
Brian,
just who he is.
He's a grinder, man. He took it just a little too literal.
Right. Yeah, seriously. You aren't kidding. You are not kidding. So yeah, I think he's already settled into his normal self, to be completely honest with you.
Don't disagree.
Oh my goodness,
at least he FaceTime 3 kids though, so that's good.
Yeah, I know, right? Good. That guy, I swear. Kevin Carter, the super chat. Thank you, Kevin, very much. Good afternoon, IB family. I know we've gotten to hear from coaches Freeman, Reese, and Golden, but I was curious if we might get a chance to hear a little from the other coaches, maybe even Chad Bowden and his job. I would love to have those guys on the show if they're ever made available. I would love to hear from them, but I don't know. I mean, Chad's done some interviews, but yeah, we'll hear from those guys. Mike Mickens he talked during the spring, and we're Coach McCullough, Coach Washington. So, we'll have some of that stuff, and we'll have a more full-time beat writer this year, which I'm excited about. So we'll have a lot more stuff from those guys. But yeah, but Kevin, thank you very much for the super chat, buddy. I really, really appreciate it. I have a couple more questions down here. Well, we have a lot more questions, but we'll get to just more. Sean Michael with a super chat. Thank you, Sean. Hey, Brian, Ryan, as always, thank you. You're welcome. Here's the question was, did you guys happen to catch Michael Mayer's interview? Pretty insightful. Also, these ranking people need to pack it up because there is no consistency. Let me find the second. I thought I had started the second part of his question. Just give me a second. Here we go. Let me see, Sean, if I can find the second. It just seems like recruiting is trending towards what type of media presence do you have and less emphasis on the field results. So back to his question. Pretty insightful. These ranking people need to pack it up because there's no. So he's basically just saying like the recruiting rankings are just getting worse and worse. And it's hard to disagree with that, Ryan.
I think there's also becoming too many platforms,
Yep.
like now you have ESPN rivals on 3, 2, 4, 7, and it's just like, I think the volatility of the rankings is the weird one for me, right? Like, again, you see like Micah Bell ranked 55 by one and a 3-star by the other, which just kind of makes it like really
Hmm.
bizarre, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's just, at some point there's just too many voices, and
Right.
it makes things a little bit muddled in my opinion. So
You know, I agree, but somewhat disagree with you on that, Ryan. We've done it a few times
mhm,
today. I enjoy that. It's good to
I
to
know.
to have disagreements. I don't mind more voices. I mind when it's I think and I honestly I don't think you would either. If we honestly thought the voices were giving honest analysis.
That's fair. That's
Because
fair.
I think you say, you know what, this site does a much better job with linemen. Whoever's doing linemen, they get that part right. This site does a better job with quarterbacks because of who they have evaluating. This site does better here. And there'd be value to more voices, right?
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
problem with the voices now, and where I agree with you in this regard, is it's a lot of people trying to find their alley, not from a evaluation standpoint, but from a this cool tool, the NIL tool, this thing that has nothing to do with ranking. It's everybody's trying to find what can we do to get more clicks, as opposed to we're going to build because we are doing this the best way. Nobody's going to give better analysis than us. We're going to put together a staff of people that know how to evaluate football, not a people that know how to dig up stories and do all that kind of stuff, because find both. And I think
Right.
that's the problem. Is that it used to be when the rankings came out, they tried to find as many people as possible that actually had coached or played or knew
Mhm.
football. Now it's just a bunch of reporters that are now doing it. And they have,
Right.
that doesn't mean that there aren't some reporters, but like the guys that are doing it are not guys that should be the primary determiners of rankings, because everyone can look at a certain guys and be like, well, that guy's really good. You don't need to have any talent to do that.
No.
But you're seeing some of these insane rankings because you have too many people that just honestly should not be involved in ranking prospects. Look, just go call kids, get scoop, get stories, and let the grown folks handle this recruit and evaluation stuff, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's the problem, is because it's not about evaluation anymore. And it's no different than when you're in the NFL draft. There's a lot of different opinions on kids, right?
Yeah.
Coming in the draft. But two people could have the same opinion, and one guy, you're like, that's just clickbait nonsense. And the other guy's like, okay, I respect that guy. I don't agree with him, but I respect him. And so maybe I might give a second look to this kid, because this guy that I know and I respect, is you and I have talked about some guys who you don't think are good evaluators, but you still respect
Mhm.
them because you think they're putting in the work.
Sure.
And I think
Sure.
that's where I come from, is you're just not seeing enough of that anymore. And that's what
Yeah.
has made these recruiting rankings, in my opinion, become less and less respectful, is because it's all agenda driven now. It's not about,
Mhm.
I want to get it right. And that's my
Sure.
thing. I want to get it right. And they should be the key. Randy Hernandez with a super chat. Good work, guys. I love IB Nation. Randy, we appreciate that very, very much. We're glad to have you on board, and we appreciate your support. Kyle Berry he's got a couple super chats here.
Mhm.
What can Notre Dame change to avoid Clemson fans in 22, Ohio State in 23, and A&M in 25 taking over the stadium? I was at Georgia in 17 and Cincinnati in 20. Awful. Um,
Don't sell your tickets to
yeah,
start. That's a
put a
big
better
one.
product on the field.
Put a better product on the field. Make
Yeah,
game days more enjoyable for fans.
yeah,
Like that's yeah.
yeah. I, I, I think, I think the other part of it too is change the way you right now, to get a season ticket, you got to pay a lot of money, not just the
Sure
cost of
do.
the ticket, but then there's the extra charge and all this other stuff that they put on it. Well, people that can't go to every game are going to, hey, if I can only go to 4 home games a year and there's 6 home games, I may have to sacrifice going to the Clemson game because I need to somehow recoup all the money I spent on that. And I could recoup it on one game, or a lot of it on one game. And
Mhm.
that is because, people want to pay $1,000 for Clemson or Cincinnati, or like Georgia tickets were going for like a thousand in 2017, if you remember. And that was with Notre Dame coming off a 4-8 year.
It's crazy.
So I mean, that's the other thing too, is it's part of it's just Notre Dame's they are a casualty of their own success, because because they don't play in a conference, and often these teams are only coming once every. However, I mean, when was the last time Clemson played at Notre Dame? I think it was like in the 70s That was a unique experience. Georgia I don't think, had ever played at Notre Dame. They only played it one time ever, and that was in the Sugar Bowl when Herschel Walker was there. That they knew this is a bucket list item. I'm never going to get to Notre Dame again. USC fans can go to Notre Dame every other year. You know what I mean? Like, so, Michigan fans can go every other year. Why didn't Michigan Michigan's got a ton of fans right across the border and some here. Why did they never take over the stadium? Because I'm not selling my ticket to a Michigan fan at face value, right? Because Michigan fans, it's normal to them. They see it every year. So that's part of it too is, will Clemson fans this time pay a lot? Yeah. Will they do the same thing in 3 or 4 years when they come to Notre Dame Stadium again? Probably not, because the anomaly's worn off, because they couldn't come a couple years ago because of COVID.
Yep.
So I think that's a big part of it. But here's the thing: if you're a Notre Dame fan, stop selling your tickets.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big part of it.
Or sell it to other Notre Dame fans.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, as best you can. Right.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, part of the thing last year, there was no energy about the season last year. Nobody's fired up about the season, and I think people are just kind of over Brian Kelly. I hope that it's a little bit different this year when Clemson comes to town. Kyle Berry says, take two. What can Notre Dame do to avoid? Oh, sorry. Two super chat. So I guess he did the same thing twice, but I appreciate that very, very much. I didn't read that to see that he had put the same thing in there. So apologize for that. Let's get back up to some more questions here. John A1 says, I think Notre Dame will have a very athletic offensive line in 22. Which run blocking schemes fit better with an athletic versus a more powerful line? Ideally, you want both, of course. Just curious when it's one versus the other.
It's a great question. Outside zone traditionally is the easy answer there, right? Like you're moving laterally. It's a lot more about angles than it is about pure movement at the point of attack. So outside zone's one. Inside zone's an interesting one because I think you can have some, I don't want to say deficiencies in power, but you can make up for it again because you're kind of attacking 2-on-1 a lot of times. There's a lot of combo blocks on inside zone, but I'd say outside zone generally is the more athletic driven run scheme.
I would say other things. Buck sweep is one where you've got to have some guys who can move. I think counter's one where the way that Notre Dame runs it, you need a little bit of some athleticism. I think teams that have the big, strong guys, they run a lot of wraps, where it's just kind of one guy kind of coming around. Power O is obviously one that you need to be able to move people. I mean, you can't be undersized and move people in Power O. Like the Denver Broncos in 1998 weren't doing to the Green Bay Packers what they did if they were running Power O and counter and ISO all day, right? Because they were much smaller and not nearly as strong. Just when you combine strength plus weight, they would have got moved around. What did they run a ton of in that game? Inside and outside zone, and they ran a ton of outside zone that game. And I mean, they were tossing outside zone, right, in that game, if you remember correctly. And it was the way to neutralize the size. I think that the interesting thing about this particular Notre Dame team is I do think they're going to be athletic. I don't think they're going to be incredibly athletic. I think they're going to be athletic. I think this is going to be a big offensive line, though. It's not going to be a small offensive line. I mean,
sure,
especially the right side. But I think the 2020 they ran a ton of outside zone in 2020, and that was a relatively athletic-ish offensive line, but yeah, I think outside zone definitely. If you're going to run it as a pure outside zone, I think you definitely have to be athletic. If you're going to run it as almost like an off tackle, almost like a wide mid zone, I think it can be more about power. So I think you know what I mean? Like Ryan, so like there's the from eye where you're attacking the inside hip of the tight end. That's more of a power outside zone. If you're running like a really fast swipe, let's get outside and you're cutting back behind the center, but you're doing it out like, where the slot lined up. That's where the emphasis. So it's like same with inside zone. Some inside zone schemes are really power oriented, and some inside zone schemes are built more for athleticism. That's the other aspect of it.
Well, that's why a lot of teams. That's why, like we talked about yesterday. That's why a lot of teams are going to duo now because it's a lot more of a power oriented run than a true inside zone is. So, to your point.
Christopher Crosby, if Notre Dame closes out on the rest of their targets and gets Austin Novosad, can they still have a number one class if they miss on Samuel Mpemba, in your opinion?
With Austin Novosad continuing to rise in the rankings, yes, because now he's a top 100 player. What was it, 247? He was top 100, or was it on 3? I can't remember.
88 and 247 had him at like 88, 89, 88, 89. On 3 jumped him up to like 180 something. Yeah. And then Rivals has him at 136.
Yep. So as he continues to rise, yeah, it's possible. I mean, you're gonna have, but you are gonna have to close on the other guys that you are, looking for. Like you're gonna have to get Jeremiah Love.
Hmm.
You're gonna have to hit home runs outside of Samuel and Pemba to have a shot. But yes, to answer your question, I do think that it can happen with an Austin Novosad at quarterback because his ranking continues to rise. Because I think the worry after Dante Moore went off the board is like, do you have the quarterback name that's going to drive up the ranking too, right? And I think now that Novosad is starting to get at a higher ranking level, I think that yes, it can happen.
So let's go to Christopher Crosby. I'm sorry, we have one from Brandon Plensner. If
Mhm.
Austin Novosad ends up visiting A&M and Baylor along with Notre Dame next week, does that alter your opinion of him potentially choosing Notre Dame?
My opinion on it, Brian, we haven't really talked too much about this, me and you, but I think that Notre Dame is going to be in the game, but I also thought that Austin Novosad was going to do his due diligence with other visits. Like I didn't think it was just going
Hmm.
to be Notre Dame and then it was going to be
Right.
a no-brainer from there. I think that he was going to check out a couple other schools, and this is not par for the course, for my opinion. I think Notre Dame is going to be in the race, but I don't think it's like a foregone conclusion that as soon as he visited Notre Dame, he was going to commit to Notre Dame. Like I don't think that's
Hmm.
true personally.
Right. I don't think it. I mean, I think that here's the thing too, Brandon, is he's been to Baylor and he's been to A&M many
Hmm.
times. I actually would have been more concerned if he would have gone to Ohio State for another visit. And the reason I say that is Ohio State's still a player for him,
Sure.
and he's been there twice, but he hasn't been there as many times as he's been to Baylor and A&M, right?
Hmm.
Whereas with Notre Dame in this conversation, everything's going to be new for him. So there's the thought of, look, those schools are going to continue to hammer what they've been hammering to him, and what's the new experience he's going to have there. Where with Notre Dame, it's all going to be new.
Right.
And so I think that's going to be kind of part of it too. It doesn't change my opinion. And Ryan, as Ryan said, I didn't think he was only visiting Notre Dame and coming in with, oh yes, I'm visiting and Notre Dame's the pick and the leader, and I just need to confirm. I never felt that was it. I felt
Yep.
like Notre Dame had to really, things have to go right. And I still think that's true. I think they got a shot at it. But that's why I'm hoping also that he doesn't visit for the day of the barbecue. I want him visiting a day where he's the only person on campus that day that you're worried about. That would be kind of the preference for me at that point in time. Christopher Crosby, Brian, and Ryan, thank you for putting Devin Leary in your top 5 in your QB series. That kid doesn't nearly get the respect he deserves. You're flat out right on that. If he was doing what he did at NC State last year at Notre Dame, I
Hmm.
mean, like put it like this: if Tyler Buckner has the season throwing the football at Notre Dame this year that Devin Leary had at NC State last year, he's a top 5 Heisman finalist.
35 touchdown passes. Yeah. Yeah.
3,400
Right.
plus yards, 5
Yeah.
picks, because Tyler's
Yes.
also going to have more rushing yards. But even if he doesn't, I mean, those were great numbers, but he did it at NC State and nobody was paying attention. You're absolutely right. He is and that was and honestly, that was a no brainer for us. I think we both had him 4th, didn't we?
Well, yeah, he's a New Jersey
Yeah.
guy, so
Yeah.
no
So
brainer.
Ryan did it biased. He still got there the right way, even though it's biased. But no, I've
Took a
loved
different
Devin Leary
path.
since he was in high school. He's
Yeah.
a heck. I mean, honestly, our top 5 was the same. The
Hmm.
only difference was we swapped. We had differences of 1 and 2, Bryce Young versus
Yes.
CJ Stroud. But our 3, 4, and 5, I believe, Ryan, I'd have to go back and look at the sheet,
You know,
but I
Hendon
believe they were all the
Hooker.
same.
Yeah.
We both had Hooker number 3.
Yep.
And the difference between Hendon Hooker and Devin Leary is Hendon Hooker is makes a lot more plays with his legs than Devin Leary does. That's the only
Yeah.
difference between the two.
He ran for
Yeah.
over like 600 yards as well
Yeah.
on top of what he did
Right.
passing.
And
Yep.
Devin Leary, I think, was in the negatives in rushing last year, which I don't knock him for. So was Bryce Young. I mean, so was CJ Stroud. Bryce Young was at 0 yards going into the season. It's just more of if the passing production is equal, and for Hendon Hooker and Devin Leary, it was very similar. Hendon
Yes.
threw for like 2,900 yards, 31 touchdowns, 3 picks. Well, he didn't take over starter until the 3rd game.
Yep.
So I mean, if you look at the per game averages passing wise, it's very similar between him and Devin Leary. But
Yep.
as Ryan mentioned, there's a big difference when it comes to playmaking with his legs, and that's why we have him number 3. And I've always thought he was overrated. You and I have talked about this, Ryan. I don't know what the heck Justin Fuente was thinking, not riding it, because whenever he put him in the game, they'd win. It
Yeah.
made no sense. I don't know.
I
Maybe he
had
said
I
something about his mother or something. I have no idea.
I had so many clips of Hendon Hooker in the past when he was at Virginia Tech. I'm just like, like something with, good ball placement or
Yeah,
athleticism or whatever. And I'm just like, why are Quincy Patterson and Braxton Burmeister playing
right.
over him? I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to think like he must not be going to class. He's doing something.
Sure.
Like he's not showing up from. There had to be something, but I've never heard anything about him being a character problem. But there had to be
Same.
something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he didn't. I don't know. Justin Fuente was a weird guy, very weird guy. But yes, Devin Leary. And if people know what we're talking about, we did a breakdown of the top 15 quarterbacks in the country. We also had a breakout player prediction, which was Tyler Buckner for us, and a comeback player of the year as well, which was Tanner Morgan, bounce back player projected. We think Tanner Morgan, now that he's no longer has the Mike Sanford influence, I think he's going to bounce back. But then we ranked them top 1 through 15. It was 3 installments, 11 through 15, 6 through 10, 1 through 5. If you haven't seen that, check it out. I thought it was pretty good series. And there's a lot of projection there. We're projecting into the 2022 season, and it's college football rankings only. It has nothing to do with the NFL draft. And so, and there's some NFL draft obsessed guys that NFL draft Twitter's obsessed with that are not on our list. You're not going to find Will Levis on our list. You're not going to find Anthony Richardson on our list, right? Tanner McKee was on it, but not in the top 10. Because it's not about NFL draft. It's about who's going to be the better college quarterbacks in 2015. Sure. We had Phil Dracovic in there, which I know is going to be an interesting conversation for some people. But it was fun. It was fun to put together. And Ryan and I are going to talk here this weekend about doing that for other positions moving forward as we head into the season as well. Mm-hmm. John A1, when you say explosive player, does it describe a guy who is more shifty that makes guys miss, or a guy with a quick burst who can outrun defenders who have advantage angles? Yes. It's both, right? I mean, yeah. It's both and with some guys, but it can be both. I mean, when I say explosive player, it's really just about, are you a big play guy, right? Sure. And can you like, there have been guys that Dexter Williams is a great example. Dexter Williams is one of the most explosive running backs Notre Dame has had in the last 15, 20 years. He was not fast. Mm-hmm. He was explosive. He had that first burst, just a boom. I mean, if he was a 4.58, he was a 4.58 from step 2, where Josh Adams was a 4.48, but Josh Adams wasn't a 4.48 till like step 8, right? and that's the difference. And then there's explosive guys like Will Fuller who were just fast out of the start, fast out of the finish. It's a different type of thing, but it really just comes down to you have something dynamic about you. Now, what I would say is I don't necessarily think a shifty guy is necessarily explosive by itself, because I don't think Kyron Williams was explosive, and he was very shifty. But I never looked at Kyron Williams and thought explosive. I just thought he was smart, tough,
smooth,
quick. Like he could do those type of things, but I never thought explosive. Chris Tyree is not nearly as shifty as Kyron Williams, but he's explosive. Jaredarian Price is shifty and explosive. He has a little bit of both. So it can be both.
I think explosiveness, you can kind of parlay it to acceleration a lot, right? Mm-hmm. So that's acceleration from a start. That's acceleration through a catch point. Like that's where explosiveness comes from for me is I think you can kind of, it's not one for one, but like there is something to be said of the relationship between acceleration and explosiveness.
Mm-hmm. Next question from God Country Notre Dame Barbecue and Coffee. How awesome is it to cover Notre Dame football for a job? I'm a first responder, so I have a passion for my job. However, there are days that suck. Does covering Notre Dame ever feel like a job to you at all? Every single day. Yeah, I mean, look, I love what I do. I do. Mm-hmm. I'm very blessed to do something I love to do. Ryan has talked about this as well. Not that he didn't love teaching or have a passion for it, but, just loves football, and same thing here. But it's still a job. I mean, the success that we do, the work that we do still puts a roof over our head. If we don't do a good job and we don't look at it as a business, like we can't just be up here fanboys, not putting out good content, because then we have to then get real jobs. Right. But yeah, it feels like a job all the time. It really does. It's like, honestly, sometimes I have to remind and this is why I think the last 2 years is going to help me this year, Ryan. Not being at Notre Dame games last year in a work capacity made me realize how much I had taken that for granted. Just kind of showing up every day, not looking around, not seeing the sights, just get there, park, go to the stadium, get my work done, get ready for the game, and you kind of forget, like, man, this is a pretty cool thing that we get to do.
It's very
It
cool.
really is. But for me, it feels like a job every day. I mean, I'm dealing with, customers with complaints, and I'm dealing with the deals I'm trying to sign, talent I'm trying to hire, where we're going to take our thing in the future, like all these different things. I'm working on the magazine. I'm doing this. I'm not complaining. I'm just telling you how it goes. I'm getting up in the morning. I'm working till 2, 3 o'clock at night. It's a job. It's a job. But it's one I love to do, and it makes it easier to work those long hours. It's not something like it, when my shift is over, I just turn it off. It's kind of a 24/7, 365 job. It really is. It really is.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, if I just add real quickly to it,
Mm-hmm.
I guess I am very blessed to be doing what I am doing, and I will never take that for granted. At least in the near future, because I still have people that I don't really talk to much. Are always like, "Oh, what are you doing now?" And I'm like, "Oh, I just made a transition of a career." And they're like, "What? That's a job?" And I'm like, "Yep, it's a job. I promise. I work hard, so it is a job." But to Brian's point, I mean, there's a lot of things behind the scenes that obviously it's a grind. It really is, but
Mm-hmm.
it's there's nothing I would rather do personally.
Yeah.
So it's been a blessing for me.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear you say that. John A1, if a head coach assembles an elite assistant coaching staff, that will that eliminate or mask game day deficiencies the head coach may have? Yes.
Yes, it can,
Yes.
100%.
Yes. Look at Kirby Smart last year.
Yeah. I think one thing that you can give credit the most to Brian Kelly is I remember Brian, like the big thing was like, I need to change some things. I need to get a better coaching staff around me. I need to take away play calling responsibilities. Like, you know what I mean? Like there is like some stuff where it's just kind of like there is you need to understand what's going to make you successful. And I mean, I think you see that all the time with having guys that you trust around
Mm-hmm.
you can
Right.
take away from those deficiencies for sure.
And I think that was the difference between Lou Holtz's early coaching staffs and his later coaching staffs. I think that was a big part of it. I think that is something that hurt Clemson last year. I don't think Dabo has. I think that's killed David Shaw.
Yes.
I think David Shaw is a great game day coach, but he has surrounded himself with bad coaching staff. So the opposite of what you're saying, John, has happened. He doesn't have a great coaching staff, so it brings down his game day excellence, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And but at the end of the day, a head coach on game day, that's the least important day of the week for me for head coach, if I'm being honest. To me, like I've heard a lot of people kind of talk about like Marcus Freeman. I'm concerned about Marcus Freeman, and I'm the last thing I'm concerned about with Marcus Freeman is game day. I mean, as a defensive coordinator, he had to be far more involved on a snap by snap by snap basis than he would have been as a head coach when he's just making the tough decisions. But you plan for that stuff. You have a chart when we're going for 2, when we're going for a 4th down. Like you've planned for all that stuff. What's the point in the game where we got to go for a 4th down, or what's the scenarios where, hey, we're at the 41 and it's the 4th and 4. No, that's not the time. Hey, we're at the 41 and it's 4th and 1. Yeah, we've prepared for this. Or, once we get inside the 35, anything less than 4th and 3, we're going for it. That stuff has all been prepared for. Your offensive coordinator knows that. Your defensive coordinator knows that. They know we got to be ready for sudden change. The offensive coordinator knows what play calls we're going with. And I think that's what makes James Franklin such a bad game day coach, is because he does too much sometimes. And does things where you're like, yeah, that's probably not how you guys planned it going into the week, and I'm more concerned about Marcus Freeman putting together the coaching staff, which he's done. What is he doing to build the character of the team? What's the way he's building, how's he going to structure fall camp to make sure that they're not being too overbearing on the players' bodies, but then also to where they're not working them hard enough during fall camp. I mean, those are the big challenges that a head coach has to have. I'm more concerned about the days, because as a coordinator, you never want to not practice. As a head coach, sometimes you got to say, hey, guys, we've ridden them pretty hard and it's been really hot. We're going to take today as a walkthrough day, and we're going to or we're going to keep them inside. I mean, those are all things that a head coach has to really get a good feel for where his team is. And he's got to get a good pulse for his team that a coordinator doesn't have to think about. Those are the things I'm more concerned about with a guy that's never been a head coach. I'm not worried about what he's going to do on 4th down, or if is he going to go heads or tails? Is he going to receive or defer? I don't care about those things as much. They'll have a plan for that. It's the other things to me, Ryan, that are far more important to being a head coach. I mean, Monday to Friday is far more important for a head coach than Saturday, in my opinion. And that's what separates the great coaches from the not great coaches, in my opinion. Thoughts on that?
Yep. No, I agree completely. We talked a little bit about this one before we started, and I think that the preparation is the biggest thing for me, right? Like we see coaches that, because I think we amplify everything a little bit, Brian, because I mean, we were talking about it, right? It's like that 4th and 3 decision, right? During a game, like how often does that actually happen, if we're being completely honest with you, right? Like there's some games where it doesn't happen at all, if we're being completely transparent about it. So I think if you are prepared adequately for it, though, the preparation side, those decisions get a lot easier, right? Like I think those decisions are the hardest when you're not ready for it, right? And I think that that's your job as a coach, is you need to prepare your team and your staff for those situations. That's why I mean, I always love the practices where everything is a situation, right? Like, oh, here we go. We're in the, it's 4th and 3, 2 minutes left. And this is the situation we need to be in. We need to get a first down here to keep the drive going. Like all those situations I think matter. And I think that's the preparation side of everything.
Yep, good stuff. John A. says, are RPOs designed to stress linebackers or safeties? Are they flexible to stress any component of the opposition's defense? Yes, on the first part, it just depends on the alignment. Sometimes you're looking to stress a safety. Sometimes you're looking to stress a linebacker. It depends on the alignment of the defense. It also depends on what kind of RPO you're throwing. So like if I'm throwing like a more vertical, quick post oriented RPO, because I'm reading that boundary safety who has a tendency to really get aggressive against run fakes, then I'm going after the safety. If it's more of like the perimeter, quick out, quick hitch, those type of things, bubble screen, I'm focusing on the alley defender, right? Or the flat defender. Sometimes that's a linebacker. Sometimes that's a safety. Sometimes it's a nickel. It just depends. On the particular play. Sometimes you're gonna focus on that inside linebacker. It just depends on the particular call that's being made. And to your point, John, there is some flexibility to how you run an RPO. You can choose who you want to read or not. And depending on what defense you're doing, you can't get too crazy with it, because then you kind of confuse your quarterbacks and your receivers. But yeah, there's a lot of flexibility to that. Now, can you stress any component of the opposition's defense? I mean, there's certain aspects where I'd say probably no. Like, I don't think an RPO is going to influence the nose guard a whole lot, because then it's just, you know what I mean? Like, you're not pulling because the nose guard beat you. You know what I mean? Like, but there are some things you can do like off of a 3 technique, but those are more designed on sort of the triple option versions of it. Those are going to be more pull give and then get outside, then throw off of it. So, I mean, to a degree, I guess if you want to get real into the weeds, Ryan, you could probably say you can kind of stress any component of the defense. I mean, because you could get into some of the triple option versions of the RPOs where you would read off of an interior guy. I can't think of one I've ever seen off of a nose, but I've seen people do stuff off of a 3 technique, where they'll just kind of let him go and then go away from him. I don't see it a lot, but
I just started thinking of a nose guard on like the second level playing linebacker. Just get it pulled out of the box.
So would a similar example be, I don't know, fourth quarter of a game against, hypothetically, let's say Michigan State? I don't know, pick a year, 2016. And it's 3rd and 6 or 3rd and 8, fourth quarter, and you decide, you know what would be a really smart call here? Let's drop our 6'5", 315-pound nose guard into coverage. Sounds like a great idea. That actually happened, Ryan. Do you know who the defensive coordinator was on that? I say sarcastically because I know you know the answer, Brian Van Gorder.
Yes.
That was you get some weird stuff.
Who was that defensive tackle? Was that Jerron Jones?
Jerron Jones.
Yeah.
Jerron Jones.
Who is now a all USFL offensive tackle.
There you go. So, good for him. Good for him.
For real.
God Country Notre Dame Barbecue. And coffee, keep doing what you're doing, IB. You guys are the best, and I always look forward to your content. It always makes my day to get that notification you were going live. I appreciate that, especially since I believe he was the person who said earlier that he's a first responder, which we didn't get to, and we should have, because I have a great deal of respect. As everyone who knows this channel knows, I have a great deal of respect for that. So, yes, and great deal of respect for what you guys do. Absolutely.
100%. And that's a nice reminder. If you haven't hit that notification bell, you should right now.
Yes, there you go. Good answer. Here's one for you, Ryan. In modern football from John A1, in modern football, is it more important for DBs to have recovery speed or length with ability to flip his hips?
I would say everything now is becoming, not always, but there's been a big influx of stretching defenses horizontally. So I think the ability to flip hips, the flexibility is something that's huge for me, right? And the length to disrupt passing windows. If you're going against a team that is more of a vertical based offense, and like, hey, recovery speed, we need it, right? Like we need the guys that can that can, maintain solid positioning working vertically. But I think in a more horizontal type of game that we're playing today with the Shanahans and McVays and McDaniels and all those guys taking over, I would say that I would lean towards the fluidity of hips and length as a little more important than recovery speed.
Christopher Crosby asked, why? We actually answered that one earlier. Let's go. Tyler Almani. Which version of DJ Uiagalelei shows up in South Bend in November? The 400-plus yard passer that we saw at Notre Dame in 2020 or the 55% completion percentage guy from 2021?
I'd say meet us in the middle, right?
Yeah, I'd say neither.
Yeah.
Neither. Yeah.
I'd say, maybe we're a 300-yard a game DG Uiagalelei potentially, and a 62% passer type of thing. I don't think it's going to be as good as it once. I don't think it was as good as it was against Notre Dame, for instance, and I don't think it's going to be nearly as bad as it was last year. I think a changing of a voice and a little bit of adversity, I think, might help DJ. Like I think he'll be a better version of himself, but I don't think we're going to expect him to throw over 400 every game.
No. Well, and like 2 years ago too, there wasn't a lot of film on what the offense was going to look like with him. I think last year he was in bad shape. He was really heavy, and I think part of that's because they were going to run him. I think they put him in an offense that he just didn't fit a whole lot, to be honest with you. So I don't think he's going to be that bad, but he was in great shape in the spring, and he looked terrible in the spring game. And again, I don't put a lot on spring games, but the reason I bring that up is because we saw a lot of what hurt him in the fall, where he was just missing on throws. You're like, dude, it's a hitch route. How did you sail that 5 rows deep into the bleachers? I mean, you know what I mean? Like that's not good. That's concerning for me. Sometimes you don't get that mental part back, and no matter the change in voice doesn't automatically mean you get that confidence back. And that's the question with DJ. If the confidence comes back, he'll have a good season if he keeps the job, right? Because there's a freshman on the sidelines that I think can run that offense really effectively, and Cade Klubnik. So that's going to make it a little bit interesting. Blaine Tiller, if you could add one opponent to the schedule to play every year that isn't USC or Navy, who would it be? Now, before you answer this, I think I want to bring in, because there's somebody else whose opinion I'm very curious to hear on this. Vince is back with us. He's taking a little break. So look, he's on vacation. Look how shiny his face is.
Got burnt up.
But Blaine asks, Ryan, and I know you got to run, so I'll give you first crack at this one.
Sure.
If you could add one opponent to the schedule to play every year that isn't USC or Navy, who would it be? And we kind of talked about this a little bit, but they're going to stay independent, but you get to add one opponent that Notre Dame is going to play every year. Who would that opponent be and why?
Texas for me would be that opponent.
Ooh.
And a lot of it is I want Notre Dame to consistently play a game in Texas, probably every other year, a home and home. I also just want it's a recruiting implication, right? I'm the recruiting guy. So Notre Dame now has 4 players out of the state of Texas in the class. They have potential to get a 5th. Being able to go down and beat the team that everyone is assuming is going to be the power moving forward, especially when they have a little momentum with an Arch Manning and Sarkisian era, I think that going down to Texas would be a nice opportunity for Notre Dame.
Vince, before you answer, I got one more I want to ask. Ryan, do you have time for one more?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a good one from Archer 452, resident Ohio State fan. What is your hottest take on the college football season for up 2022? He has 2. Utah goes 12-1 and makes the playoff, and Wisconsin struggles to a 7-5 record. I don't think the latter's a huge hot take because they weren't that good last year.
Yeah,
although I do think they're going to be better.
Last year?
They're 9-4.
Oh,
yeah, 9-4.
Okay.
Yeah, they finished strong before losing to Minnesota, but the Big Ten was down. What are your 2 hottest takes for the 2022 football season?
Oh man, I'm getting sideswiped here,
I
man.
got
That's a
one.
tough one.
I'll
Let's
give
hear.
one
Let
of
me hear
mine
one.
while you're
Yeah.
thinking.
Uh-huh.
The Heisman Trophy winner will not be C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young. They will both have way too much, because that's the assumption, right? One of those two guys. The Heisman Trophy winner this year will not be someone getting a whole lot of conversation about that, because that's how it goes, right? Like after Lamar won it the first year, he could do nothing right the next year, right? True. Even though he was probably a better player the next year. We've seen that before. So that is my first hot take: is the Heisman Trophy winner will not be Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud. That is my hot take for this season. I heard somebody say yesterday, a guy that I listened to said he thinks that the 4 playoff teams are going to be made up only of SEC and Big Ten teams. That would be a hot take. I think it's an incredibly off hot take. Yeah, Georgia, Bama, Michigan, and Ohio State as the 4 playoff teams.
Oh,
it's brutal.
Michigan's going to take a deep step back, and I don't think that's a hot take, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes. My hot take, I would say USC is not going to win 10 games. They're going to win single-digit games. I don't know how hot of a take that is, but I don't see them being as good as everybody thinks, even though the Pac-12 isn't very good. I just don't see them getting to that level, right? Yeah. Not yet, anyway. And again, I will also say that I like it when USC is better. It's better for Notre Dame if USC is better, okay? But I just don't see that happening. I don't. So that's where I'm at right now with them. And then
he's still thinking, Ryan. Have you thought of yours?
I have 2 actually. I'm going to use one off of your Heisman take. My Heisman take is that it's going to be a non-quarterback this year.
That is. Do you have a thought in your head of kind of who you think it might be?
I think it's going to be a running back. Jahmyr Gibbs is a guy that pops into my head because I think that a lot of people are going to kind of take some.
One of my hot takes is could play into yours.
Okay.
I think Texas is going to be the best team in the Big 12 this year. That's my hot take. I think people are going to be talking about them in November as a potential playoff team, because I think they're going to beat I think they're going to lose to Alabama, and I think they're going to they're going to get hot. I think they're going to beat Oklahoma on a neutral field, and I think they're going to get hot. And I think a lot of it's going to be because Bijan is a monster. Now, I think he's going to go off. And now, they'll have Xavier Worthy, and I think Ewers will get some love because of, he was overhyped to begin with. But I think Bijan could be that guy to put up just some big time numbers that he could jump into that equation. That's one of my hot takes is Texas could be a playoff team this year. I really do. I hope not, because as much as I respect Texas, I don't want to see them in Oklahoma get rewarded for bailing on the Big 12. But I think Texas is going to be a lot better. If they play Alabama tough, they're going to come out of that game, Vince, a lot like Notre Dame was in 2017 when they lost to Georgia. Like thinking okay, we can play with anybody. If Bama whoops them, then my whole hot take is out the window in week 2. You know what I mean? You got another one, Vince?
I want to say something about Clemson, because obviously they didn't have a great season last year, but they still won 10 games. And that's more of a product of their schedule, I think, than anything else. But they still make it to 10 wins, and maybe they even make it to a playoff. But I just think that they're going to be a shell of their former selves, because I don't think the offense is going to be able to live up to what the defense is doing. We've seen that a lot locally here for quite a while. And I see that being the case with Clemson. I just don't think they're going to be the Clemson of old. And I think that's the beginning, I don't want to say of the end, but they're going to be in a down cycle for a little bit. And I'm okay with that too. You know what I mean? And I think Notre Dame's going to have a part to say in that, since they get to play Clemson in November at home. And I think they're going to expose a few things about Clemson. And that game's going to be super hyped. There's no doubt about it. Both teams are going to have really good records going into it because of the ACC tie-ins. But I just don't see Clemson being that elite of the elite, right? And I mean, look, they've won national championships. They belong in tier 1, like we've talked about. But I just feel like they're hanging on by a thread right now. Last year kind of gave a little bit of a peek into that, right? But they still won 10 games. It's just the beginning of the season didn't go very well for them. I don't know. I'm not a believer in Clemson. They have a great defense.
I've been on this hype train for a couple of years. That Clemson, and Ryan, you and I have talked about it. I know you're on the same page. Trevor Lawrence masked a lot of warts on that program. And I'm not incredibly confident. Like, I'm fine hiring Chancey Stuckey. Dabo hired like 6 of him. like guys with like no coaching experience or very little coaching experience, and he handed the keys over to the offense and the defense to some of these guys.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
so it's either going to be a phenomenal success or they're going to be in trouble, no matter how good the front seven is. Now, it may not show, to Vince's point, in their record because the ACC.
Right.
But I'm going to say this is another hot take I have. Clemson will not be the second best team Notre Dame plays this year, and may not even be third.
Ooh, may not even be third.
Yeah,
interesting.
That would be considered a hot take for me if they're not even third.
If your hot take is correct, then they'll definitely be third.
Yeah, good point.
Because part of it, possibly not being third, has to do with potential rise of USC. But anyway, Ryan, what's your final hot take?
Final hot take that I'll leave everybody with. It's a player hot take. Phil Jurkovec, first team All ACC this year over Tyler Van Dyke.
That's not hot, baby. That's the truth.
That's pretty hot. Pretty hot, Vince. Pretty hot.
A lot of people would disagree with that. So I think that would make it a hot take because Tyler Van Dyke is the hot name in the ACC right now, right? Like he's the potential first-round draft pick. And we had him in our top 5. I mean, we had him ranked ahead of Phil Jurkovec. Simply because, honestly, Ryan and I, we talked about this. The reason Phil wasn't as high for us was, number one, the hand injury. How is he going to be coming back from that? Anytime a quarterback hurts his hand, you always wonder, how's it going to be? Does his grip ever come back to the way that it was? The other part is the guy's replacing 5 offensive linemen, and you got a new offensive coordinator, and Miami does too. But, I think there's going to be a lot of weapons around him. And if they can figure out the offensive line piece, that team's going to be really – really dangerous, in my opinion, this year. And who will be second and third? I don't know who, but BYU is going to be in that conversation. I've said this before. I think North Carolina is going to be better than people think. Neither of those teams should be good enough to beat Notre Dame, but I don't think Clemson should be either. BC is another one that's going to be in that conversation. I think BC has a chance to be. I'm a big Jeff Hafley fan. I think he's an excellent football coach, and I think but that was a really interesting take by Ryan.
Yeah.
To go with that there. Yeah.
I like that though.
Yeah. I dig it. And so we'll get back to this question for you, Vince, because I wanted to get that one in for Ryan before he had to leave. So I knew I could come back to this. If you could add one opponent to the schedule to play every year that isn't USC or Navy, who would it be? You and I talked a little bit about this before.
Yeah, we have.
I want to give Ryan a chance to answer that one, but I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that.
Ryan's Texas is actually really, really
makes
good.
A lot of sense.
It makes a lot of sense, especially from a recruiting standpoint, which you would assume he would have since he's our recruiting champion at Irish Breakdown. And so that one makes a lot of sense. I dig they're so neck and neck for me, but I dig the Purdue-Michigan State rivalry that Notre Dame has with them. As much as I'm really getting sick and tired of the Notre Dame to the Big Ten and all this other stuff, they do have a relationship with a lot of the schools in the Big Ten. And I get that wholeheartedly. It would never be a Michigan. I don't need to see them every year. That will never, ever be one that I would say. I'm trying to think more outside the box as far as Ryan was thinking, like a Texas or an Oregon or something like that. But none of those really jump out to me. So it would be like a Purdue or a Michigan State. Like those are the ones that I would like to see. Also because, and this is selfish, I can travel to those games and take in that atmosphere. You know what I mean? Where normally I don't travel very far for away games, but I do like going on the road and watching Notre Dame play. It's a cool situation. I enjoy it. I like it. So for all of those reasons, I would say like a Purdue or a Michigan State. Like I would like to see them on a rotating
You've been
basis,
consistent
maybe.
with the Purdue thing.
Yeah.
You have. I understand it, especially since you're from Indiana. There's even more of that.
And there's a ton of Purdue fans around here. And again, the Michigan State piece, my father-in-law went to Michigan State, so he's a huge fan. And so there's that. So there's definitely some personal bias there. There's no doubt about that. But I like when Notre Dame plays a team where the fans are around here and you can kind of rub it in, or just as a fun little rivalry, watch the game together, that kind of stuff. I do enjoy that.
Yeah, I want to respond to something here from Will Chesanik, and he did it over like 4 different messages for some reason.
I think I saw it.
He said, I disagree, Vince. Everyone is down on Clemson. They have one down year. Y'all act like they didn't win multiple chips and interrupt the greatest extended college football dynasty in history.
They did all that.
A lot of that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Number one, y'all act like they didn't win multiple chips. Well, wasn't that long ago, Florida State was one of the more dominant teams in the country in 2 years. It's cyclical, right? Alabama's been the only consistent thing in the last decade. I mean, Auburn won a championship and played for another in 4 years. Is anybody talking about Auburn right now? I mean, look,
Right.
the reality is that the guys that were part of the multiple chips aren't there anymore. And as we've said, here's the thing: is if we were just reacting to their down year last year, then you'd have a point. It'd be emotional, but we predicted their down year last year because we saw what was coming.
Right.
The team they had in 2018 was not the same team. They've lost their defensive coordinator. In 2018, they had Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott both calling plays. They have not been the same team since Jeff Scott left. From a game plan and scheme standpoint. The talent level is not the same. They don't just have a Justin Ross and a T. Higgins they can trot out in the field this year at wide receiver like they've had in the past. They don't. I like Will Shipley a lot.
Sure, absolutely.
He is. I mean, at best, he's as good as Travis Etienne at best, and I think that's questionable. But the quarterback is not even close. And the reality is Clemson benefited in 2019 and 2020 from having Trevor Lawrence. And this is what we said last year, why we predicted they would not be as good. Because they were a descending program from before. That's why they got embarrassed by Ohio State in the college football playoff. Sure. Sean Davis has made this point many times. He's like, if Notre Dame doesn't pee down their leg in that ACC title game, it should have been 17-0 Notre Dame. I mean, they were moving the ball up and down the field on Clemson. Pick Trevor off. He masked a lot of warts, and they're just not the same program. So it's not like we're saying a team that's loaded with a great defense, but they always had a great defense. The difference is this team doesn't play offense that way, and their secondary is not as good.
They don't have Trevor Lawrence to put the team on their back. Look, DJ Uiagalelei is a good quarterback. He's a good quarterback. But if and I'm saying good. I'm not saying great. I'm not saying elite. You know what I mean? He's a good quarterback, but number one, I don't believe in Clemson's offensive line. And if DJ doesn't have an offensive line, he's in trouble. He's a gigantic human who doesn't move around very well. Okay. Now, are some guys going to bounce off of him? Yeah. But he's a sitting duck back there in the pocket, and they don't have the explosive playmakers on the outside like they've had in the past either. And so their offense, we've talked about it a million times. Notre Dame has had defenses that are championship caliber defenses in the past. They have not had the offenses. If you don't have the offense to put points on the board in the playoff, you are not going to win games. Talk to me when this iteration of Clemson puts points on the board in the playoff. I don't see that being the case. Are they going to put points up against ACC teams? Yeah, they probably will.
They don't have the secondary back then either, Vince. Like they don't have the secondary to match the front like they had in 2018, they had a great defensive line. I mean, Christian Wilkins was a first-round pick. Dexter Lawrence was a first-round pick. Didn't play in the playoff, but he was part of the team that got him there because he was suspended. Clellan Ferrell was a high draft pick. The other defensive lineman, Austin Bryant, was a fifth-round draft pick. 3 first-round draft picks. But they also had a first-round draft pick at corner in A.J. Terrell. They had a second-round draft pick at corner in Trayvon Mullen, third-round draft pick in Trayvon Mullen. They don't have that kind of talent this year in the secondary.
Right.
So, no, they're not the same team, and that's the reality of it. And again, if we were just responding to last year, you'd have a point. But again, you're responding to last year. We're not. we're saying we knew that was coming.
Right.
We saw that coming, predicted it last year, and they haven't done anything to fix it. And unless you are going to say, Wes Goodwin is going to be just as good as of a defensive coordinator as Brent Venables, it's not a given their defense is going to be great. And all of us are assuming their defense is going to be phenomenal. And I understand because it's very talented in the front seven.
Right.
But is the defensive coordinator the guy that's going to be the one, that's going to be doing it? I don't know. He's got a lot to prove.
Yeah.
These guys called one game against Iowa State who sucked, so I'm just not there. They got to prove a lot because again, we saw this coming, and again, go look at the game against Ohio State in the playoff 2 years ago. It was not the same Clemson team. This isn't a down year.
Right. This is a trend. This has been a pattern.
Right.
And
exactly.
I know you guys you touched on this because I was listening earlier on the show. I'm not sold on Brent Venables as a head coach either. So I think he was a great defensive coordinator, but a lot of the stuff that he didn't have to deal with, he will have to deal with as head coach. I'm nervous for him.
But that's my question, Vince, is like, I think a lot of that hire makes a ton of sense. I just don't know can he turn that off?
Right.
Can he turn the guy that had to get pulled off from the field every other second?
Every 5 seconds.
Can he turn that off as the head coach? That's my big question mark.
Yeah.
If he can, I actually think he's going to do well.
Okay.
I do. I think he's got a lot of traits that can work. He's a hard worker. He's about discipline, doing things the right way, play hard, competition. He's a good recruiter. It's just you can't be that emotional guy like that Monday to Friday. But then I also would have said the same thing about Kirby. You can't be that crazy guy run up down the sideline and win. But he is, and it works.
Yeah,
and it works.
Now he's the highest paid college coach in the country.
Exactly. So we'll see. It's a boomer bust move, but I actually am leaning towards. I actually think this is going to work, and I'm completely understand why you and Ryan are a little like I don't know about that.
Yeah,
I get it, completely get it.
There's a lot in his history that worry me.
For some reason, and here's the thing: he made really good hires.
Okay.
He made really good hires this offseason too.
That's good.
And and he kept some guys at Oklahoma, kept Bill Bedenbaugh as the offensive line coach, hired Jeff Lebby from Ole Miss as the OC. I think he did some really good things from putting a coaching staff together standpoint that I think is going to help them as well. Fullback dive. Could we have the start of an Ohio State-Notre Dame rivalry? Recruiting battles intensifying, at least one marquee matchup this year. They're the two Midwest powers. Could this be a platform for Notre Dame to step up?
100%. I mean, I love it. And in the past, and we've talked about this before, I believe on the show, it might have been one of our walks, that Ohio State and Notre Dame, when we're talking recruiting, they were not mentioned in the same sentence because Notre Dame wasn't going after the guys that Ohio State was going after when push comes to shove, right? Maybe early on they would have the same offers, but if a kid blew up, it was an Ohio State thing. It wasn't a Notre Dame thing. And Notre Dame would back out and they would do, and okay, fine. Now, if it's a Midwest kid, and even more so than that, it's Ohio State, Notre Dame, and it's neck and neck, and Notre Dame's actually winning some of those battles. So that's step number one, right? Step number two is being competitive on the field. And we're going to have an opportunity to see that this year coming up. And then when Ohio State comes to Notre Dame as well. So that's step two. And so if Notre Dame can split that series and keep winning all, some of the recruiting battles, that is a rivalry I am on board with, because right now, as we sit here, Ohio State is the Midwest. They are. Notre Dame is challenging that. And so if Notre Dame can challenge that and it becomes a rivalry, that's only good for Notre Dame. So I love it. I think that's a fantastic idea.
I think, yes. I think it could be a rivalry much like, and even to a greater degree, depending on how things go because of the recruiting overlap. But I think the fact that you throw in the fact that Notre Dame has several Ohio State former players on their staff adds to that early drama that helps create the rivalry's got to come from somewhere beyond just you played two games, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the point you're talking about, Vince, like the recruiting battles, you're battling for the Midwestern power type of thing. All that adds to it, not just two games. I think the other thing too is I think it's going to be a lot. It could be a lot like what happened with Alabama and Clemson. It wasn't just that Alabama and Clemson were playing each other every year in the playoffs. There was a storyline there.
Yeah.
Right. Clemson's head coach is an Alabama grad. The manner in which he took over, never had been a head coach before, and all this other kind of stuff. There's great storylines. And to me, that's the other part of this that makes it really interesting is there's some great storylines there. And I think the other thing too is because there hasn't been a rivalry between the two in the past, it only adds to the potential of it becoming one.
Yes.
Because if your opinions of Michigan are established, you either think it's a rivalry or you want nothing to do with them.
Sure.
This Ohio State thing is going to be very interesting.
Yes.
And the manner in which I'm not even going to go there. I've been hammering their fans a lot this week, and I don't want to disrespect Archer because he's been great. But a lot of their fans are just really And
I get that. I try to look at it above the whole fan thing because you talk about the storylines. Obviously, there's storylines with Notre Dame's coaching staff and the connections to Ohio State, right? There's storylines on the Ohio State staff that have connections to Notre Dame. So that's a great spot to be in, right? The location is fantastic. The recruiting, all of it. I think it has the makings of a really good rivalry, to be honest with you. And again, Ohio State has ruled this area both on the field and off the field for a long time. And Notre Dame hasn't. They've been a secondary figure overall, right? And so if that becomes a rivalry, that's good. That's a really, really good thing. And then hopefully Notre Dame can supplant Ohio State. And if not, they're just going to keep butting heads, and that's great too. So I'm all about it. Not so much so that I want them to be in like the same conference.
Sure.
Okay. but I would love for them to continue
Good
to play
answer.
each other. Okay.
Good answer. Good answer.
Thank you.
Chris Basker, what are your thoughts? Vince, I'm going to kick this to you first because I have
Okay.
a very strong opinion on this, and I'm very curious if you have the same one. What are your thoughts on prevent defenses while playing to maintain the lead when your current defense has you leading in the game? It seems that too often teams get scored on anyway. So, and not prevent so much like in the traditional prevent where you got like a bunch of dudes 35 yards off the ball.
Right.
But more of a, we're going to play off. We're going to let it
Right.
kind of let them have their thing. I think that's kind of where he's coming from. What are your thoughts on that, Vince?
So I am a big believer in you are who you are, and you should continue to be who you are. And that's how you got to that halftime lead or whatever the success that you're having. That's how you got there. And when you change it up, that's, I think, when things start to go south for you, because now you're not who you are. Now, I'm not saying that, you blitzed and you had some success and you did, I'm not saying go all out and be crazy. I'm not saying that either. Okay. But there has to be a happy medium to where, and I know you guys were talking about BK earlier, but he calls the dogs off completely, and it bites him in the butt. Like, I'm not about that at all. Like, you're still going to play your game. You're still going to play defense. So much so that I would continue with the same scheme and maybe sub some different guys in, like that kind of a thing, as opposed to adjusting your scheme and keeping the starters in. I wouldn't do that. So I am all about you keep playing and you keep playing. And that's the end of it. Prevent. I hate prevent. It is not, I'm not a fan of prevent in any way, whether it's from a play calling standpoint or having guys back, whatever. You play who you are, because that's what got you there.
I nailed it. If there's less than 2 minutes and I'm up 2 scores, then I'm going to play a prevent, because I'm going to make you run 6 or 7 plays to score
and run the clock and
that's
all of
it.
that stuff.
But if there's more, if there's more time than that, like if there's 4 minutes left, they can conceive, depending on their timeouts. If you're playing prevent, they could conceivably, because in prevent, you're giving them the edges, you're letting the catch and get out of bounds. Like I'm not saying, like you said, I'm not necessarily saying, hey, I'm bringing all out blitzes where they can catch a quick slant and beat us.
Right.
But I'm still playing my defense. And I think you nailed it, Vince. It's it reminds me of the scene, or not the scene, but you ever watch it was like the Broncos, Packers, like the things they do on NFL Network. They're going into the last drive of the game, and the Broncos are up a touchdown, and there's a few minutes left. And there's the conversation between Mike Shanahan and Greg Robinson, the late Greg Robinson, late in the game. And Greg Robinson's kind of trying to get direction from Coach Shanahan on, what do you want me to call? And Coach Shanahan's like, just do what you've been doing. He's like, so blitz. He goes, just do what you've been doing, And I thought that was great, like, because that's when coaches can panic. Oh, we don't want to let Brett Favre get that big play. No, do what got you here. And then why'd they win that game? On 4th down, they brought a blitz, and it forced an incomplete pass. That's what got you there. That's why you were Steve Atwater sacking him and forcing the fumble early that Tyrone Braxton recovered. It was, getting in his face and getting him off target. Because you remember the first drive of that game, it was bam, bam, bam. He hits Antonio Freeman over the top for a touchdown. And you're like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, they just answered your score with a score. But after that, Greg Robinson's pressure started to really get to Brett Favre, and he made some mistakes, forced some turnovers, and allowed Denver to build up a big lead, which they can hold on to while Terrell was out. And then that won you the game. So it was do what got you here. The worst is when teams go away from what they're doing when it's a 1-score game.
Exactly.
And even worse when they do it when it's like 7, 8, 9 minutes left and you're only up 2 scores. Like I've seen that happen so many times.
Time and time again, man.
What are you doing?
Yeah. That you're not going to, you don't get points for being the nice guy, number one. And I know that was always the case at Notre Dame. And I'm not necessarily talking about Notre Dame. I'm talking about in general. You got to win the game. Your first priority is to win the game,
and their job to stop you.
Right. And you don't have to have a heart attack doing it. If you're up 4 touchdowns, okay, you take your foot off the gas, second half of the 4th quarter or whatever. I get all of that. I have no problem with that. But if it's a 2-score game, a 1-score, no, you keep playing. You keep playing, man.
Yep.
And there's things you can do offensively too, by the way, that can run the clock, and you can, not that burn offense, but there's certain things you can do.
But my whole thing is keep scoring. If you have a lead and you keep scoring, they can't come back. I've never understood that.
I know.
It's one of the things I respected about Bobby Bowden back in the day. He's like, we're going to play for 60 minutes. And it's your job. It's not my job.
You don't like it, stop it.
Right. Exactly.
I'm with you. I believe me, and I've been on the bad end of a beatdown. Okay, it stinks, but you respect it to a degree as long as they're not doing it in a blatantly bad.
There's a right and a wrong way for them to do it. Right, you run a reverse throwback. I was like, okay, dude, come on.
Absolutely
right. Luke Breeding, will it be hard to land a quarterback at 23 knowing CJ Carr is already committed? No, I don't think so. I don't think CJ Carr is a detriment. I think just getting in on late on kids. Look, any quarterback that you would want is going to be a competitor.
Mm-hmm.
As simple as that. And if he wants to be a champion, he's going to go to a place where he can compete for championships. And every place he's going to compete for championships either has a quarterback that's going to be like CJ Carr in front of him or one coming behind him.
Right.
So I don't think it'll be. I think the timing of when they got involved in other quarterbacks is going to be a bigger detriment than what's in front of or coming behind any of those quarterbacks. Like if Austin Novosad or Kenny Minchie were concerned about CJ Carr, I don't want him.
Right.
As long as their concern is, hey, coach, am I going to get an honest opportunity? Like, that's different. If you know CJ Carr is coming and, hey, look, coach, I know you love CJ. He's your guy. Am I going to get a legitimate shot to battle? Or is this just more of a, you're bringing me in for depth? That's a very fair question that any quarterback should ask.
Absolutely.
But
and you know what? Dude, I would be worried if the kid didn't ask that question.
Correct.
I would be. Yeah.
Or his dad.
Yeah.
But whatever, as long as, you know, and if you're, hey, look, yes, we love CJ. That's why we got him. But we're not going to waste a scholarship on a kid just to come in and hold a clipboard. Well, you know, there's other things we can do. We need to bring in a quarterback that we think can compete for championships. And if you're getting a scholarship offer at Notre Dame, it's because we think you can do that.
Yes.
And if he believes that answer, and I believe that would be true, that's what I've been told as to why Notre Dame is going after Austin Novosad and Kenny Minchie is for those reasons right there. They think those kids can flat out win. You know,
all you got to do is show them, like, hey, look, this is the list of kids in your class, in the 23 class that we've offered scholarships to. We're not just throwing out scholarships to guys, you know. We're throwing out scholarships to dudes, and you're on that list.
You're going to be playing with dudes, and that's why we're recruiting.
Exactly.
No doubt about it. Absolutely. We got a super chat down here from Mark Stewart that I wanted to bring up here. Mark says, Brian, would you be okay with a Notre Dame player getting an NIL deal over $5 million, but of course not as a recruiting enticement, but as a result of popularity? Here's the only no problem with that, Mark, in theory. Here would be my only thing. I truly believe that the NIL stuff should be genuinely about your image and likeness resulting in you getting certain opportunities, a clothing line, like a spokesman deal, something like that. I'd have no problem with it. The only concern I would have is if you're just handing out money to a kid to keep him there so he doesn't transfer somewhere else or something like that. The only other concern I would have, Mark, that would make me nervous is what are the time commitments of that $5 million deal? That'd be my only other concern is like, okay, a company's paying you $5 million. And it's not an enticement. They're expecting something or should expect something. That's what NIL is supposed to be about.
Right.
You know, is this a thing where you're flying all over for speaking engagements? Because then that's taken away from your preparation. It's taken away from your academics.
Right.
All that type of stuff. But as long as there's not something like that, no, I got no problem with that. I mean, if someone's willing to, if a company views a player at Notre Dame as me paying him $5 million is going to result in my business benefiting from it. Okay.
Right.
As long, like I said, my only caveats are I don't want those deals to interfere with your ability to prepare to be the best football player you can be and to be able to get the education that you need to get.
Right.
Because, well, he got $5 million. $5 million, especially nowadays, doesn't go all that far. If we're going to be completely honest with you. Okay. Government's taking over half of it. Okay. If we're going to be honest about it. And all the hangers on and all that kind of stuff. It's why we see kids go broke.
Yeah, you're right.
That education is going to help you take that $5 million and turn it into 20 at Notre Dame. So it does still matter. So Mark, as long as that stuff is still going on, I don't have a problem with that.
Right, me neither.
I like people say, oh, there should be a salary cap. There should only be a salary cap if the schools are the ones paying for this stuff. As long as you remove this from the enticement part of recruiting, I don't have any problem with what kids make. None. As long as it's a genuine NIL deal.
Right.
You know,
and as a coach, it doesn't interfere with what we're doing as a program.
Exactly.
It's not going to take him away from practice.
Exactly.
And it's not going to take him away from his studies because guess what? You are at Notre Dame and that is an important piece of this whole thing. So as long as it doesn't take away from everything else, because there are a lot of other hours in the day. You only get 20 hours for football and you get, you have to allocate whatever you need for school. But yeah.
Vince, the vast majority of players at any school are not worth $5 million
That's
to
true.
a company. They're just not.
That's true.
Right? It's a different animal. They're just not. But if a player, like if there's a Brady Quinn that comes along, like if Rocket Ismail was playing in today's era with all the marketing opportunities he would have.
Oh, sure.
I would say the only thing I would say, Mark, is I think the options of getting a 5 would more likely be like he'd get 3 or 4 deals that would equal $5 million as opposed to 1.
Yeah.
I think that 1 deal for $5 million would make me a little bit more nervous because I feel like it's not done for the right reasons. But the total number being $5 million, more than $5 million, I don't care about that. Because again, Brady Quinn would have had crazy marketing deals during this time. Rocket Ismail, if NIL was like, if he was playing now and he was the same guy and the same name and all that, he'd be getting crazy NIL deals. He'd have a Rocket, brand clothing line.
He'd be on the side of like Jeff Bezos and Rocket.
I mean, some company would have to be smart enough to make a shoe for him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like a Rocket shoe. I would.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
If I was like Nike or Reebok or whoever was with Notre Dame, hey, we got your deal with you, but we'd like to do some little something extra with Rocket to make a shoe that's the Rocket shoe that we're going to sell. Hey, go for it.
Right.
So if there's something like that, I got no problem. Look, I've said this before. I'm all about NIL. I hate NIL because of the way it's being used to entice high school kids.
Okay.
But I made this comment when Justin Ross got hurt. I said, that's exactly why I'm a proponent of NIL. Because that kid made Clemson money. He was a part of something special, but NIL wasn't there for him. And then he gets the injuries, and he's never going to value professionally the way he could have because of an injury he sustained playing for you.
Mm-hmm.
That bothers me.
Yeah.
Right. So if the NIL was around for Justin Ross, he's getting his and he's going to be okay. Now, is he going to make the money he could have made? No, but he's still going to be okay. He's going to have a degree from Clemson. He's going to have $1 million that he can use to go start up some company to do something that he can then go do something with his life because he got an education. I'm a big proponent of NIL. I mean, Vince, for years I've said, if you're selling a kid's jersey, he should get a cut of that.
Yeah, no question.
I've said that for years. I mean, especially when you look at these jerseys are like $200 freaking dollars or $150, and it's like, you're selling it because people like that player.
Right.
That's different than saying that kid deserves a salary because he's, entitled to it because he plays college football. That's a different animal. NIL, if done correctly, is something that I fully support. If done correctly. And I'm not someone who believes there should be caps on it either. I'm not. Because to me, like, I'm very much a capitalist. I'm not a corporatist, but I'm a capitalist in the traditional sense. And I don't think you should put caps on something that if a company's willing to pay a kid this much money and the market value is that's what the going rate is for that kind of player, good on you, buddy.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Good on you. I just don't like it that it's being used to buy players. I really dislike that. I really dislike that. Alan Watson says, can Notre Dame tell a player they can't take a certain NIL deal? I don't believe so.
Yeah.
I mean, they can advise it. Hey, look,
Right.
man, you don't really want to sign with that company. That's like really against, what we do. It's going to make you look bad, and I don't even want to like name the companies that could possibly be, but there are some. There are definitely some. Where I'm like, hey, man, you don't want to get into that. There might be certain things that they may say, hey, you can't get into that because the state we live in, like, there's some states where marijuana is still illegal. If you're an athlete in that state, you don't want to be doing like out-of-state marijuana commercials, right? I mean, we're using some common sense. Like, dude, that's a bad look on you and us. There's certain things like, I'm sure that there's certain laws that, hey, you're 19, you can't be a spokesman for Budweiser. That's against the law, right?
Right.
Something like that. But I don't think that they can just flat out say, no, you can't do that. I mean, they could say, hey, if you do that, you're not going to play for us. That's fine. But they're still not preventing him from taking the NIL deal.
Right.
So very, very good question. Very good question. Let's see here. Get to some more, some that are kind of follow-ups. I want to respond to this from Michael. Brian and Ryan, happy Friday free for all. And Vince, are either of you hearing anything in regards to Austin Osbury possibly transferring to Notre Dame from Auburn if Jaden chooses the Irish? Thanks for any insight. I have a feeling that this started because of a comment that we made.
Ooh.
And I knew it was going to happen when I said it, but it just sadly, it's the way that it is. I said in our show about a week ago, I think, I would like it if this happened. I would be okay if this happened. We did not say it's going to happen, that we've heard it's going to happen, that there's rumors. I just said I would be cool with it if he wanted to come. So as far as I know, there are no legitimate rumors of Austin Osbury transferring to Notre Dame. Am I saying it'll never happen? No, I'm not saying that, because I haven't been told that either. It's never been part of the conversation with Jaden Osbury, because here's the deal. Marcus Freeman had a chance to take Austin Osbury last year, and he decided not to.
Yeah, good point.
So I don't think they're going to use this recruitment now if they've changed their mind since then. If the scholarship numbers have worked out where they could maybe take Austin next year, I'd be cool with that. But I don't know any rumors of that, and that's why I hate saying things like I give my opinion on something, and the next thing you know, it turns into a rumor that so and so said such and such. And
it's also I just want to reiterate, and this has nothing to do with Austin specifically or Auburn for that matter, but it's still very difficult to get into Notre Dame as an undergrad transfer. Like that's still a thing, and he is gone, and I'm not gone. He is an undergrad. He's not at Notre Dame. So it would be a difficult transfer. Now, he's only been there for a year, so he's probably done a lot of the 101 type stuff.
And it'll be much easier for a freshman to transfer.
Right.
Much easier.
Absolutely. Because he hasn't gotten into a
There's not a single dean that needs to pass off on that, right?
Right,
I mean, that's the reality of it. It would be much easier for a freshman to transfer. As long as, because see, if you transfer as a freshman, it's going to be as much, if not more, about your high school transcript as it's going to be about your college transcript.
Yeah, good point.
All right. Irish Okie. Against the Ohio State defense, is there a particular area of the field you think the Notre Dame pass offense should especially attack? Deep middle, sidelines, over the middle, flats, etc. Well, I think part of it depends on what Ohio State is doing schematically. I think based on the Oklahoma State team, I would be attacking the seams. Now, not just with seams, but seams obviously are part of it. So seam routes are part of it. But I'm talking about attacking the seams even with there's horizontal stretch, which is
Crossers.
4 verts, but also doing it with that, but also Vince, the vertical stretch stuff where it's deep end post. I want to isolate that safety, put those safeties in binds, because the way that Knowles like to use his safeties in run support, I would look for ways to attack that. And that's what Notre Dame did last year.
Yeah.
Attack them. I mean, you got the Lorenzo Styles post route for a touchdown, Michael Mayer on the crossers that you were referring to.
Can I also say,
attacking the middle with the slip out?
If you're a member of the message board, you put up some good stuff that I would say
video
that
to watch,
people need to go watch, and it will explain everything that Brian just said. Yeah. You will understand. That's all I'll say. It's really, really. I spent too much time reading through that on my vacation.
Well, it's probably a good thing, because you had something to do. Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Rob Lobo, will Coach Tom Reese work with the rest of the offensive staff to come up with game plans? Who will take over Coach McNulty's role, who seemed to be Tommy's right-hand man? A couple things on that. I want to work backwards. Tommy Reese had a very good relationship with John McNulty and Lance Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
From my conversations with the people, Tommy also had a respect for Coach Alexander and Coach Quinn as people. He was not working just with John McNulty. I think that was another sort of media creation because of their past relationship. Tommy understands that he has to work with all the coaches, which is why he pushed so hard to bring Harry Heastand back, why he pushed so hard to get Chancey Stuckey over more accomplished receiver coaches. Why he went for Dylan McCullough. And then, of course, Jared Parker, someone that was more of Marcus Freeman, higher than Tommy Reese.
Right.
But everything I've heard is that relationship is budding and growing. So if Tommy Reese is a smart coach, and I think that he is, he understands 2 minds are better than 1, 3 are better than 1, 3 are better than 2, 4 are better than 3, and 5 are better than 4. I would expect him to go into that. I mean, Vince, anything you want to add?
No,
to
I
that?
agree with that completely. It wasn't a 2-man show. I mean, there were more minds, and it wasn't a 2-man show. That's what I'll say.
Okay, Jared Rhodes asked this. Brian, with you growing up in Ohio, how did Notre Dame become your team? Good question. I'll answer it somewhat briefly, because I've answered this before. This is what I love when you always got new people joining. Yeah. So, and I think Jared's one of our new ones. Basically, it came down to my dad, Jared, and with the exception of my favorite NFL team, all my favorite teams are the same teams that my dad had growing up. So, my dad was a Cincinnati Reds fan. Live in Ohio, I'm a Reds fan. My dad was a Boston Celtics fan. I became a Boston Celtics fan. The only difference is the Denver Broncos. They were Redskins fans. I became a Broncos fan because of John Elway. But so my dad liked the Notre Dame. He didn't like Notre Dame as much as I did. But essentially what happened is my dad grew up in the East Coast in Norfolk, Virginia, at a time when there wasn't a lot of college football in the ACC. It was a basketball conference, even more so then than it is the last 20 years. But every Sunday he would listen to the Lindsey Nelson replays on the TV. And so he just kind of became a big Notre Dame fan. He kind of like as a kid, he grew up kind of watching the Yankees as a kid for the same reason. That was what was on TV in Norfolk, Virginia. And so he was kind of he was a Notre Dame fan. He was more of an NFL guy than a college guy, but I liked the Notre Dame because my dad liked the Notre Dame. Well, when I was 10, Notre Dame won a championship and I watched a lot of it. I was a fan, but during that, watching that team that year and from the opener against Michigan, which was like two highly ranked teams, to Miami, to USC 1 versus 2 at the end of the year, I was hooked, man. I was completely hooked. And so that's kind of how I became. So that really solidified it to where I became an even bigger Notre Dame fan than my dad. But it was my dad kind of liking Notre Dame and introducing me to Notre Dame and protecting me from the insanity of the Ohio State fans that helped me become a Notre Dame fan. So that would be my answer. So. And Vince, you want to? You're just.
It's location
Yeah.
for me. There's no question about that.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one, Vince, and this one was one that Ryan would have liked to see Ryan's thoughts too. If both Isaiah Foskey and Keon Keeley reach their potential, who's the better draft prospect? I'm actually going to text this question to Ryan.
Man, that's tough though because we've seen more of Foskey at the college level.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easier to see that he's hunting right down to his potential, right? At least at Notre Dame. Now, I still think that there's another level he could get to in the NFL. But, it's hard to say for me from a Keon Keeley standpoint because, I've seen his highlight films and that kind of thing. So I just need to see him grow and develop because a lot of things can change from being a junior in high school, to being a senior in college or a third-year player in college. So, that's really tough for me to answer. The easy answer for me right now would be Foskey because he's already kind of achieved a lot of that. Mm-hmm. But Keon Keeley could be really, really good.
I'm going to say, so if we're just talking about potential, right, which kind of eliminates what we've seen from that, your stance is totally fine, Vince. I'm just going to focus on this part. Potential-wise, it's easy. It's Keon Keeley. I think if Isaiah Foskey reaches his full potential this year, he's a top 15 to 20 draft pick. No doubt about it. He is a beast. If Keon Keeley reaches his full potential at Notre Dame, he's a top 5 draft pick. I think he's that good. I think he's that explosive, that athletic. He's longer than Isaiah. He's more explosive than Isaiah. I think he's even more dynamic athletically than Isaiah. Isaiah's stronger and bigger and will always be thicker and stronger.
Right.
But I when I look at Keon Keeley, honestly, this is going to sound nuts. And please, he to me, I think more Will Anderson than I think Isaiah Foskey when I think of Keon Keeley from a dominant standpoint, and I think he could do for Notre Dame what Will Anderson has done for Alabama, meaning just like monster numbers, like oh my gosh, that guy's a monster. I think he could be that kind of player. I really do. I really do.
Okay.
Here's an interesting one. I love the name since it was like 2 questions after we were asked how I became Notre Dame fans. I love it. It's Domerson's birth. Gents, whose win last year did more for their program for their future? So looking forward, Oklahoma State or Cincinnati?
Ooh.
For me, it's Cincinnati, Vince.
Cincinnati.
Yeah, because I think Oklahoma State's always going to be somewhat limited as a program because they're going to be number 2 in their state and all that kind of stuff. And they just kind of are who they are. Cincinnati has been trying to make a move for a Power 5 for years. They used to be in one. People forget. They were in one of the Power 6 conferences when the Big East was a thing. And then they got booted out. And they've been kind of looking for a path back. And I think the win over Notre Dame boosted them perception-wise and then also boosted them into the playoff. When we saw the year before, Cincinnati going undefeated does not guarantee them a playoff spot. We saw that in 2020. They went undefeated and still didn't make a playoff spot.
They needed that marquee win, which they got last year, no doubt. But I agree with you. And that was not that they wouldn't have been asked to be in the Big 12, right, without the season that they had last year. but it certainly didn't hurt them any. You know what I mean? Like that was big, and that they showed that they could play with the big boys, and they're going to be able to use that playoff run for years in recruiting.
Right. It's already paying off.
Absolutely.
I mean, they beat Illinois for Malik Elzy. Michigan tried to get involved with Malik Elzy, didn't work.
And look, the bottom line is Oklahoma State didn't go to the playoff.
Right.
I mean, they won a Fiesta Bowl. That's great. Notre Dame clearly hasn't done that in a while. But I think Cincinnati was a huge boost. It's absolutely huge boost for them. I mean, see how well they traveled to Notre Dame, for goodness sakes. I mean, they're things are on the uptick for Cincinnati, which is fantastic for them.
Here's a good one for you, Vince. DD Boy, I'm curious your thoughts on Marcus Freeman changing up the pregame routine to include pregame mass on Saturday. Brian Kelly was against this and felt it was bad for the players. Doesn't move the needle either way. I don't know that Brian. I never heard Brian Kelly say it was bad for the players. I never heard that. I'm not saying he didn't say that. I mean, Vince, I've been tuning Brian Kelly out for a long time. If he thought that was stupid.
Yes.
Honestly, I think pregame mass, and again, I'm not Catholic, but like when I'm at when we were at Loose Emoji's funeral, it was a Catholic funeral. I was still able to, even though I'm not Catholic and the rituals and all that, I was still able to spend a lot of time in prayer in my way. And a pregame mass, it's going to be a Catholic proceeding, but I'm still going to be someone who's going to be able to use that ritual to get focused, to get my mind off football to a degree, to spend time in prayer. I think it's a unity thing. It's just you, all those type of things. And so I think it's good. And then you go right from there to the stadium. So it's like that last minute of get your mind right.
Yep.
Get focused,
Absolutely.
Spend time in prayer, lift up whatever you need to lift up. And when you walk out of there, it's time to go.
Yes.
And I think that's
it's a completely different vibe than what they had been doing, is just walking from the football facility to the state like that. I don't know. That doesn't do anything for me. I'm with you 100%. Now, I went to Catholic school growing up. We always had mass before games. Before we got on a bus to go to an away game, or before we had a home game, we had mass in the cafeteria, and it was the speedy 25-minute version mass, but it was an opportunity. Okay, hey man, it's game day. Like that was part of the ritual of game day. And you're right. Not everybody on our team was Catholic, but it gave you an opportunity to just kind of settle your mind, block out everything else that was going on. And it starts that sooner, as opposed to trying to do that in the football facility and then walking over to the stadium. It's just different, man. I fully appreciate the fact that Marcus Freeman wanted to change it back up to the way that it was, because I think it allows the players to just really lock in. I really do. And I think it's great.
Yep.
I was upset when they changed it. I don't know the reasoning behind it either. I assume the head coach had something to do with it, but why would you change a tradition like that? That is beyond me.
Agree. Because you don't respect the traditions.
No, there's that.
You view them as a stumbling block.
Yeah.
So, Vince, we have a World War II question.
Oh my
Irish for life.
Gracious. Okay.
Love this. If Japan had followed their original plan, the declaration of war delivered on time, to launch the third wave attack on Pearl Harbor and destroyed oil tanks, repair facilities, etc., what would have changed in World War II? So my first stance is obviously, so what he's referring to is Japan was going to send a third wave to completely wipe out the Pearl Harbor. Now, the first two waves were basically focused primarily on, the first one was on kind of Battleship Row, right, on the ships. And then the second one was
airfields.
Airfields.
Yeah.
They didn't really touch the, like he just talked about, like, the oil fields and things like that, which the American carriers would do when they were attacking, the Japanese strongholds, and when they kind of countered. Essentially, what would have happened is that we've talked about this. People said like there would have been nothing stopping them from attacking the West Coast, and I think they would have gone after the West Coast. I mean, they did attack Alaska as an attempt to divert from Midway, right? They tried to attack the Aleutian Islands, which is connected to Alaska. I think they would have done things to keep us occupied on the West Coast, but I don't think they necessarily had plans for like an invasion of America. I think their whole thing was to essentially get us out of the fight before we even got in it, so that they can then accomplish their, Asian Pacific, goals.
It still would have been very difficult to invade the West Coast of America.
Sure.
Because remember how small Japan is, and how large the United States are. It would have been very, very difficult to have a sustained invasion.
Yeah. And we had a far more armed populace even then. I mean, it's much more so now. We had a much more armed populace in China because they did invade and rout China pretty effectively.
Yeah, they did.
But China was they were a different country. They were just a different country. Honestly, what would have changed is a lot more people would have died because the end result would have been the same. I mean, no matter what they would have done after that, if they would have completely wiped out Pearl, no matter what they would have done, America eventually would have bounced back because of our industrial power.
Longer.
Would have taken longer.
It would have taken longer.
We would have had to kind of uproot them from even more. It would have been much harder to keep them from taking over Australia, which was one of their objectives. It would have resulted in a lot more casualties on our side and their side, and their unfettered. Because here's the thing: once we were able to occupy their attention, it was harder for them to just ravage other nations like they had been doing prior to us getting involved. I mean, if you ever study like some of the stuff that the Japanese did in China, it's horrific. Some of the that was those are awful. I mean, I know they're our allies now and all that, but I mean, some of the stuff like we all talk about what Hitler did, and Hitler was just barbaric, just a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. But the Japanese were not innocent. Like they weren't. I mean, they were. Some of the stuff they did to the Chinese were awful. I mean, just disgusting. And so they needed to be destroyed. Of who they were, and we did that. But it would have been much longer, harder, a lot more casualties. But the reality is Japan never had the infrastructure in place to compete with us. That's why they tried to take us out.
Right.
Because they were running low on oil, and the United States was doing things to stop them from getting oil. We were involved in embargoes and different things to keep it. And the thought was that they could wipe out our Pacific fleet, then we couldn't stop them from doing that. But eventually they still would have had the same problem. They had like you said, Vince, much smaller population, and some of their strategies. I mean, the kamikaze stuff pretty early on, meant you only have a certain number of people you can turn to if you look at the population of their country compared to our country.
Right. Exactly.
Kamikaze
only works for so long.
Yeah, I mean, at the end, they just didn't have. They had more planes and they had pilots by the end of the war in a lot of instances. But so Midway doesn't happen the way it did. But but that would be my thought. But here's the thing that I always go back to: the carriers weren't there, and I still wonder how quickly. Like the carriers would have had to completely retreat if the whole Pacific fleet got wiped out, essentially, right? The carrier group, because it wasn't just like 5 carriers out hanging out, right? It was the carriers and the carrier fleets were out. Some of them were out. I still wonder how quickly they could have maybe gotten some of the stuff, because like our whole Navy wasn't in the Pacific. We had a Navy that was fighting in the Atlantic against, Germany as well, or, helping the British as well. So I often wonder how quickly we would have been able to mobilize for a counterattack, but it still would have been a lot longer. You wouldn't have had Midway be what it was if you completely lose Pearl. I mean, that's the reality of it. But yeah, there was a lot of strategic mistakes. But I mean, there's all types of things you could look at. Like, what if Hitler doesn't invade the Soviet Union? Well, the end result would have still been the same, but they wouldn't have been dominated as quickly as they were. You know what I mean? It's like they were always going to run out of soldiers and run out of oil and run out of all these other things. They couldn't compete with the Soviet Union from a manpower standpoint.
Right.
Eventually, the Soviet Union would have been able to, do what they needed to do, and with the British and all that. But if he would have still focused on defeating Britain, because they were getting close, and Britain did so many. The British did so many heroic, tremendous things when they were basically all alone. This little tiny island fighting Germany all by themselves, once they kind of took their attention off of Britain and focused it also on Germany, on Russia, it changed the war, and you wonder how it would have gone. It would have ended the same, but what would have happened in between?
Sure.
I often wonder that stuff. Same thing with like, what if we didn't figure out that it was midway? What if they, there's so many different things that happen a certain way, like what if the Japanese didn't try to sink Yorktown twice? Because that's, because they had hit Yorktown. America only had 3 carriers in the midway. Japan had 5 or 4 was 5. No, it was 4. Was it 4 or 5? I forget which. It was 4, I think. We only had 3. And so, because I think Saratoga had been sank. I think Lexington had been sank, right? It was basically just the Hornet, Enterprise, and Yorktown. Well, Japan hit Yorktown in the Midway battle in one of the early raids because they were kind of going back and forth. Well, the emergency crews on the Yorktown got the fires put out so quickly that when they went back and saw Yorktown later, even though it was damaged, it wasn't burning anymore. And so they thought it was a different carrier. So they attacked it again and eventually, essentially sank it. But they thought they took out 2 carriers and only took out 1. What if they knew that was still the Yorktown? Would they have gone? So, I mean, there's just so many things like that make studying that war and a lot of different wars so fascinating.
Yeah.
And everybody has different opinions on what would have happened here or there. Some people say they wouldn't have gone to the West Coast. Some people say they definitely would have invaded the West Coast. We don't know because they didn't.
Right.
But I think that's what makes it really, really fascinating, Vince. Anything else you'd
like?
Oh,
no, that's fantastic. That's all good stuff.
So I'm very curious what other people think about that, because it's always fun to discuss those. Because I'll say, like, I'm not a historian. I was a history major, but I mean, I could be wrong on some of these things, but that's kind of my opinion. Here's one, Vince, back to football. I know this is what you want to talk about. Do you guys, Robert Bishop, do you guys think that the impending super conference future of college football will be here to stay or fizzle out after a decade or so?
It's trending to stay. I don't know that it's going to happen overnight. There's people are saying it's going to.
I think it's going to happen, Vince. I don't think it's going to be here to stay.
Okay. You think
what I mean away? By because look, everything, we've never had something that's permanent for the rest of history. It's going to be that way.
Right.
I think it's going to fade because I think it's being built on a house of cards. Because I think ESPN doesn't actually have the infrastructure anymore to do what they're trying to do. That's why they're trying to get out of their ACC deal, because they know they can't afford to pay the ACC and the SEC because the streaming service that they've had isn't working. The cutting the cords is not slowing down. And if you look at Disney stock, I think Disney, because that's the parent company, Disney stock has lost so much value in the last year. I'm not trying to get into why. It just is a fact. It's not just because of the economy. There's other reasons that they've gotten dinged. It's about where it was like 7-8 years ago. Meaning if you bought Disney stock 7-8 years ago and saw it skyrocket, it's now back to where it was, slightly less than what it was. So they're not the economic power that they were 5 years ago. ESPN I'm referring to. They don't have the same financial power. And I think Fox, it's almost kind of like, I feel like this is the Cold War of football TV, and Fox is the United States, which I think is in a much better place financially, and ESPN is Soviet Russia, which looks like the strong power, but inside it's actually crumbling. And it wasn't until the U.S. got into an arms race with them, and then Russia realized that they're not what people think they are, and they collapsed. Right? That's what I think is happening with ESPN, which is why they want out of the ACC deal, because they can't afford to pay both.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to happen. But when things don't go how they think they're going to go with streaming and all this other kind of stuff, I think their business projections, their business models are faulty. I think what we're going to see is it's going to collapse, and we're going to go back to smaller conferences. That's what I think is going to happen. That's my stance on that, Vince. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't think the super conference thing is going to happen as quickly as everybody says that it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I think we have sifted our way through the Notre Dame has to join a conference right now. I think we've gotten through that part of it. We're on the other side of that, but I don't think it's going to be the super conferences, within the next few years. You know what I mean? Even with UCLA and USC and all that, I think it's going to take a little bit longer. And a lot of these teams that are not considered part of the super conferences at the moment aren't going to just go away. You know what I mean? They're not going to go away silently into the night. There's going to be a fight, and there's going to be, it's not just going to happen. You know what I mean? And the college football playoff is going to have a lot to say about that. And right now, that's not an issue. And so I don't think it's going to happen right away. I think it'll happen eventually, but I think it's going to be even bigger than some. I think there might be 4. I think there might be 4 big conferences because, again, I don't think you're going to be able to exclude all the teams that you think you're going to be able to exclude. I just don't see that being possible. And if somebody tells me again that the ACC or that the SEC and the Big Ten are just going to go off and have their own tournament, and that's give me a break. Sure. It's not going to happen tomorrow, okay? Sure. So everybody just needs to take a breath. Do I think it's going to last forever? Like forever's a really long time, okay? A really long time. When my son was born, I didn't think he'd ever graduate high school. And that's like 3 years away. Like there's a lot of things that are going to happen in the future that could change. So I will not say that it will be here forever, but I do think it will come eventually. But I don't think it's going to be in the manner that everybody thinks it's going to be.
Yeah. I'm sorry. There was a great response to our World War II conversation. Derek Calmer said, I thought the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor. That's a great scene from he's like, was it when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? The Germans just let him go. He's on a roll. That's a great scene. Very well done, Derek. Very well done. Love it. Love it. Love it. Get to a few more questions here, and we got to get out of here. We're going to be creeping up on 4 hours here pretty soon. And there's a spider crawling on my light over there that I'm going to have to go kill here in a second. But it's kind of creeping me out. We'll get a couple more questions here, Vince. I do want to get to a couple of these super chats before we go. Because I have a light there, and so I see this shadow on the light, and it's this giant spider. It's about to be assassinated. Benjamin Carchi, what are your top Notre Dame program changing moments? How can Marcus Freeman raise the bar of the Notre Dame program?
Program changing moments. I mean, I was going to ask Brian what the definition of a program changing moment. Obviously, there was a program changing moment when Newt Rockne was hired as head football coach. Program changing moment when he built the stadium. There's a program changing, all of those, national championships that Notre Dame has had. Honestly, I think the hiring of Marcus Freeman is a program changing moment for Notre Dame. I definitely do believe that. Specifically to what Marcus Freeman can do to raise the bar, I think he's doing it, to be honest with you. He's there every day with these guys during the summer. He is part of what they're doing. They care. It's very obvious that he cares. Okay. I don't know that was always the case in the past. The guys love Marcus Freeman because he's there. He's present. Before my kids were born, there was a moment, and I think this happens in a lot of people's lives, where you're like, man, I don't know if I'm going to be a good dad. You know what I mean? And somebody told me, just be there, be around, be present. Okay. That's half the battle of being a good parent. That's half the battle of being a good head coach. It's just being there, being with the guys, showing them that you give a crap. And it's not just about your golf game. Yes, that was pointed. But still, the point is being there. And I think the hiring of Marcus Freeman was a game-changing moment, or program-changing moment for Notre Dame. And I think he is currently raising the bar. Now, specifically on the field, he's got to win a playoff game. That's going to raise the bar, right? He's got to win a national championship. That'll raise the bar. The bar's been raised by Brian Kelly to being a double-digit win football team all the time, right? Now they need to take that next step, and that's winning a playoff game. And then the next step is winning a national championship.
Agree. My biggest program-changing moment of my lifetime was beating Miami in '88. I think that set Notre Dame on a completely different path. The rest I'll let Vince have handled that. I got 2 questions I want to get to, Vince, before we get out of here, because these are these are a couple good ones. Archer, if Notre Dame joined the Big Ten, who would you want your 3 protected rivalries to be? I think that for me, that's kind of an easier one. Michigan State and Purdue for sure, and I'd want Penn State to be the other.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
interesting.
That's the 3 teams I'd want to play every year.
About a rivalry with Ohio State, and I like that rivalry. I do. But I think I would like it more if I didn't have it every year.
Or if every year happening in the Big Ten title game, not
exactly. Right. Yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly. It's like your favorite candy. You can have it every day and it's great. But then, you know what? It's even better when you don't have it every day. You know what I mean? It would be that kind of a thing. So I agree with you on what you had for your rivalries.
Couple more quick ones. Jeffrey Zielinski, Notre Dame rushes for 300 yards in the opener. What's the final score?
Notre Dame has won by a lot. I go
41-24.
I mean, yeah, that's a good win for Notre Dame. Even though
Ohio State won't be on the field, and
Right.
Notre Dame will have put yes.
Notre Dame Ohio State's a quick strike offense. We know this, but if Notre Dame rushes for 300 yards, it's going to be a blowout.
Somebody just said something. No USC. I forgot that USC was in the Big Ten.
Totally forgot about it.
To be completely honest with you, yes.
I would want USC to be a protected rivalry. You're absolutely right.
I would probably go USC, Penn State, and Michigan State. I'd drop Purdue.
Yeah, it would be USC. It would be Michigan State and Purdue for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely forgot the USC was in the Big Ten. It's like it wasn't even on my radar.
It took me like 5 years to stop calling the Pac-12 the Pac-10.
I know, right?
It's going to take me a minute.
It took me a while to get used to calling the Pac-10 the Pac-10 because it was the Pac-8. So, yeah. Right. The Big 12, I still call the Big 12 sometimes the Big 8. Last one. Here, I'll answer this one, Vince. Irish for Life asked, Brian, would you offer an NIL deal to a Notre Dame athlete? You can just have them on the intro saying IB is the home for Notre Dame coverage. No, I'll never offer a deal to a Notre Dame student athlete. I feel like there are certain lines that we shouldn't cross.
Exactly.
When it comes to the relationship between yourself and another player. And that doesn't mean you can't have a relationship. It's totally fine. But once you enter into a business relationship, it becomes very challenging to then do your job. Let's say I had Tyler Buckner do a thing for us, right? Well, what happens when he doesn't play well? Do I rip him?
Right.
Is he going to still want to do it with me? What if he does okay? Some people don't think he played well. I defend him because I genuinely think he did play well. Then it comes across like, well, you're just saying that because
he works for you.
He's your spokesman.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I just think there's professional boundaries that look, if other people want to do it, go for it. That's your business, not mine. I run Driscoll Publishing, right? And Irish Breakdown is a part of Driscoll Publishing. That's what I'm worried about, okay? And for us, it's just not something that I would ever be comfortable doing.
Right.
That's just my 2 cents on that.
That makes a lot of sense. You're blurring the lines of credibility, in my opinion. And even if you're doing it on the up and up, the complete up and up, and you will never talk well about a kid who's on your payroll or whatever, it's completely on the up and up. The opinions would be there. You know what I mean? And perception is reality, unfortunately, with a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And that just by not doing it, you eliminate that. And I think that that's smart.
Yeah. Last one. Here we go, Vince. Robert Bishop says, if Marcus Freeman has a decade success with a natty, does he get a big contract from Notre Dame like Kelly got from LSU? Yes.
Yeah, he would.
It won't take it. If he gets a natty, it won't take a decade.
No.
It won't take a decade. That too. All right. That's going to do it for us, everybody. Hey, Vince, since you've been out all week, I know you've been wanting to read one of these. I'll let you take us home, buddy.
Our boy Mace helping us out. Join the message board, hit the like button, subscribe, the notification bell, share this podcast, and leave a 5-star review. Visit the IB store for some sweet merch like Vince's hat.
Vince has got some merch at the house waiting on him when he can come over and get it later.
Excited. I wore my IB merch to the beach yesterday. I was out there flaunting the logo. It was great. But always go Irish.